her bedroom. This was an attempt to create a false defence to count 8. When she entered her plea, it was on the basis only of what she wrote to her sister and not what was said to her mother. In the context of this case, it is not necessary to decide that issue, and I will sentence her on her basis. The defendant is 22. She had no convictions prior to these matters coming before the court. I note that she was under 18 at the time of the commission of count 1. She had turned 18 by the time all other offences were committed, but I bear in mind her young age and the principles set out in the guideline in relation to sentencing children and young people. Though she was an adult at the time of the commission of the vast majority of this offending, I must bear in mind her maturity as well as her chronological age. There is evidence that she is immature. Apart from her age, there is some other personal mitigation. There are clear overtones of difficulties in her childhood. She's been self-harming from a young age. However, there is little clarity about what these difficulties involved. It is mitigation that before this offending she was of good character. It is troubling to say the least that she shows no significant sign of remorse, even continuing to profess the truth of her allegations. The only flicker of appreciation of what she has done came today, with a brief note read by her counsel regretting the effects of her post on the 20th of May 2020. I've received much psychiatric evidence in this case, all of which I've read. I heard evidence yesterday from Dr. Bacon called on behalf of the defendant. Dr. Bacon maintains that the defendant has a complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Dr. Locke, who has provided a report for the Crown, does not accept that this is a conclusion which can be drawn, given that there is no satisfactory account of any antecedent trauma. I agree with the conclusion of Dr. Locke that there is no evidence upon which I could conclude that there is a complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Since she has been found guilty, the defendant has hinted at other sources of trauma, but has given no real indication as to what it could be. Of course, I've considered whether the aberrant nature of these offences means that I should assume that the defendant is suffering from some mental impairment. There is no explanation for why the defendant would commit these offences. She has gone to extraordinary lengths to create false accusations, including causing herself significant injury. No explanation for this behaviour is apparent. However, that does not mean that I should speculate. Unless and until the defendant chooses to say why she has told these lies, we will not know. In any event, I question the relevance of the defendant suffering from a complex post-traumatic stress disorder in relation to sentence. When Dr. Bacon gave evidence yesterday, I asked her to comment on whether such a condition could reduce the culpability of a person to be sentenced for perverting the course of justice. Dr. Bacon had told us that this was not within the scope of her instruction from the defence. When I asked the question of Dr. Bacon, Ms. Blackwell, KC, intervened, telling me it was not the defence case, that the defendant's complex post-traumatic distress disorder, if that is what she has, is relevant to culpability. I do accept that it is part of her personal mitigation that she has vulnerabilities that I will take into account. I turn to the structure of the sentence. The count which concerns C and the counts which concern Mr. Trencove are separate from each other and from the other offending in this case. However, the offending at counts 5, 6 and 7 can properly be regarded as a course of conduct. Counts 8 and 9 are together part of the same course of conduct, and whilst they could be seen as 5, 6 and 7, they concern a separate incident and were committed on bail for other matters. I intend to impose concurrent sentences on counts 5, 6 and 7. However, there will be a consecutive sentence on count 1. There will be additional sentences on counts 2, 3 and 4, concurrent with each other, but consecutive with the other sentences. There will be further sentences on counts 8 and 9, concurrent with each other, but consecutive to the other sentences, save that I will temper the structure of these sentences to give effect to totality. There is no guideline for this offence, and I apply the general guidelines overarching principles. The maximum sentence is at large. I've been provided with a number of authorities which I've read. There are no analogous offences for which there are guidelines. I consider first the defendant's culpability, then the harm. I consider the purposes of sentencing, and then the aggravating and mitigating features. I must then consider totality before arriving at my final sentence. The cases to which I've been referred provide the following factors, which are amongst those that I should bear in mind. I remind myself that because this offence strikes at the heart of the administration of justice, it is to be regarded as serious. Deterrence is an important aim of sentencing, though I must remember that when sentencing young people, this may be extinguished or diminished, where the principal aim of the youth justice system is to prevent offending by young people, and I must have regard to the welfare of the defendant. This offence is fact-specific. Previous cases are of little assistance. When considering culpability, I must take account of the seriousness of the underlying offence. I bear in mind the nature of the deceptive conduct and the time over which it continued. I consider whether the offence cast suspicion on others, whether others were arrested. In this case, I'm asked to consider community impact. I'll set out in detail my approach in this regard. In relation to all counts, I bear in mind that these were allegations of sexual offences. These carry not only the risk of prosecution, but also a potentially indelible stain on the character and reputation of everyone accused. Sexual allegations, even where disproved, often leave the falsely accused person living under a general and misplaced suspicion. I consider culpability and harm. In count 1, the culpability is high. The allegation was very serious. However, the defendant withdrew her support for the prosecution of C after 2 months. The harm is also high. In his victim personal statement, C sets out how frightening it was to be wrongly accused and then arrested and kept in the police station. He had to remove himself from social media because he was wrongly accused of being a rapist. Even 5 years later, he says he doesn't go to Barrow Town Centre because he fears he's under suspicion. He couldn't even bring himself to pick up his son from nursery for fear of what people were saying. He describes the defendant's false allegations against him as the worst experience of his life. He does not think he will ever recover. In relation to counts 2 to 4, the culpability is higher still. The allegations were even more serious, and there were a number of them. They were maintained over a longer period. They were bolstered by the creation of false evidence with some degree of sophistication. The harm is also even higher than in count 1. Mr. Trengove's house was spray-painted with the word rapist. His mother had to leave her house. He was remanded into custody between May and August 2019. Even when released on bail conditions, he had to live far from home for a further 19 days. When he returned to Barrow, he was abused on the street by strangers. He became isolated. He tried to take his life in August 2020 and is still taking antidepressant medication. He lost any sense of self-confidence. He says he can no longer work. He has a child now, and social services received scores of anonymous phone calls saying he is a rapist and not safe to be with his child. He recently moved house, and a neighbour called him a rapist, saying they didn't want him living there. The culpability in relation to counts 5, 6 and 7 could hardly be higher. The allegations made were of the utmost severity. They were made over a protracted period. There was considerable sophistication in the creation of false evidence to support them. The harm in relation to these counts is extremely high. Mr. Ramsan was arrested on the 7th of July 2019 in the public street in the community where he lives, and then held in custody for 36 hours. 2 weeks after his arrest, he was in such despair that he tried to kill himself in front of his family in a most graphic and upsetting way. He sustained injury in that attempt, which has left scars. Though he was informed the next month that there will be no further action by the police, That was, as he puts it in his statement, only the start of the worst period of his life. He then describes being targeted by sections of the Barrow community. He's been unable to sleep and to this day fears for his safety. The windows of his vehicles have been smashed and their tyres damaged. He and his family have had to endure abuse. The windows of his rental property have been put in and then, once repaired, immediately put in again. He's received countless death threats over social media. He's felt anxious going out for the last 3 years. His family, including his children, have been affected. For a period, they had to move out of the family home. He describes the trauma of being cross-examined in court during the trial. His businesses were ruined. He describes going from a successful businessman to someone who has virtually nothing. Also in consideration of harm is the young man who happened to meet the defendant in Preston on the 18th of July 2019 on the way back from Leeds. When he was told that he'd been accused of raping the defendant, he suffered serious consequences. He tells me in his statement that he was studying for professional exams and doing well at work. As a result of this allegation, he was unable to continue his studies and hasn't worked since. He tells me he suffered a serious crisis in his mental health. He attempted to kill himself. Though the tone of his statement suggests that this false allegation was not the only cause of these problems, it is his belief that they significantly contributed to them. He remained anxious about going out and meeting people. He doesn't trust people. He found the trial itself very stressful. Since then, he has started to feel better. I turn to the statements of those who were wrongly identified as being the victims of exploitation. Their names may not be reported. They all refer to the surprise of being approached by the police about matters of which they knew nothing. One then refers to particular problems she had, as she was pregnant at the time she was spoken to, and particular problems which followed. Another speaks of her feelings at having been, as she puts it, exploited by this defendant. Another speaks of the disruption of being required to give evidence at court at a particularly inconvenient time in her life. I now turn to the question of community impact. Under Section 63 of the Sentencing Act 2020, I must consider the harm which the defendant intended and that which might foreseeably have been caused. I've seen statements in relation to this topic and viewed a compilation of footage taken at the time. According to the statement of Superintendent Pearman, the period following the Facebook post on the 20th of May 2020 was turbulent in Barrow. He says that Barrow had not seen such a public display of anger for 30 years. There were public demonstrations targeting the local paper, the local Asian community and the police. This was in the height of the first lockdown, and Superintendent Pearman tells me in his statement that there was a sense of heightened tension for about 4 months. The comments attracted by the defendant's post named local businesses who feared they'd be subject to attack. One restaurant had its windows smashed. Police resources were diverted to dealing with the threat. Death threats were made against local restaurant owners. Marches were organised to protest about a suspected police cover-up. The fire service installed smoke alarms at vulnerable premises. Local journalists were the subject of credible threats. One left her home and moved out of the area. Racist anti-police graffiti was sprayed on a wall in Barrow. Threats were made on social media against the police. A demonstration convoy of cars drove from Barrow to Ulverston and back again on the 25th of May. The police were under pressure from those who believed they were complicit in a cover-up on the one hand, and those who felt unsafe at the hands of apparent vigilantes on the other. Individual police officers on patrol seeking to support the community in COVID were subject to insults. Social services were also the subject of unwarranted insults and criticism. The local newspaper was subject to boycotts and ultimately, I'm told, collapsed for financial reasons, though there's no evidence before me upon which I could conclude that this was a direct result of the boycott. By mid-June, there were ongoing protests. These appear to have been in response to a person from outside Barrow who was active in the demonstrations having been arrested. The issue then appeared to be more his arrest. Nonetheless, there were serious consequences. An Indian restaurant's windows were smashed. There were further protests and further allegations of a police cover-up. In the meantime, there were credible threats to police officers. Attempts were made to find their home addresses. Online threats were made that they will be found and they will be harmed. I'm told that this state of arrest continued until the August of 2019. Local people felt motivated to donate their money to a fund which was set up to support this defendant. This fund quickly reached £22,000. What effect, if any, should this have on the sentence of the defendant? During the course of this trial, I've heard many days of evidence from this defendant and have read hundreds of her social media communications. It is not the Crown's case that when she blamed Asian and Pakistani men for her abuse, she was racially motivated. I agree with that position and will sentence on the basis that she was not so motivated. I note that in this case she has made false allegations about white men also. I'm sure she chose to lie about Asian men because she was modelling her lies on other cases of national prominence. She regarded the prospects of being believed as greater if she based them on true cases already within the public consciousness. She was not principally motivated by a desire to stir up public unrest. However, I cannot conclude that she chose to make her Facebook post of the 20th of May 2020 for any other reason than that she intended to create an impact within the town. I accept that there was no direct incitement to do anything, but it was entirely foreseeable that there will be considerable community impact upon those of Asian or Pakistani heritage. She cannot be held wholly or directly responsible for the criminal behaviour of others who used her allegations as an excuse for their own inexcusable conduct, but it was foreseeable that others would behave in antisocial and unacceptable ways. It was not foreseeable that her cause would be taken up by those outside Barrow and developed to the extent that it did. However, some community impact was foreseeable. To that limited extent, I take into account the community impact. The harm of this offending extends to an undermining of public confidence in the criminal justice system. We are aware that sex trafficking of young females does occur. There is a risk that genuine victims will, as a result of this defendant's actions, feel deterred from reporting it. People may be less likely to believe their allegations. I'm sure that those charged with investigating such offences will do all in their power to avoid any reluctance to investigate such allegations. In this case, I make reduction for the defendant's age, then for personal mitigation. In relation to count 9 only, I reduce the sentence for credit for a guilty plea. I then further adjust the sentences for totality. To assist in understanding how I've arrived at my overall sentence, I first set out the sentences after trial for each count without applying any reduction for any of these factors. In relation to count 1, the sentence would have been 2 years imprisonment. For counts 2, 3 and 4, 5 years imprisonment, concurrent with each other, but consecutive to the sentence on count 1. For counts 5, 6 and 7, 7.5 years imprisonment, concurrent with each other, but consecutive to the sentences already imposed. For count 8, 2 years imprisonment, and for count 9, 1 year and 4 months imprisonment, both consecutive to the sentences already imposed. I then turn to the various reductions for the factors mentioned above. The defendant was a child when she committed the offence at count 1. The relevant guideline indicates that the court should take as its starting point the sentence likely to have been imposed on the date at which the offence was committed. That sentence would have been, if custodial, a detention and training order of less than 2 years. The reduction from the adult sentence will be 1/2 for count 1. In relation to the other counts, the reduction for age will be of the order of 1/4. there will be a reduction for age of 1/3 from the adult sentence in relation to counts 2 to 4. In relation to the other counts, the reduction for age will be of the order of 1/4. She was 19 during much of this offending. After her false allegations about Mr Trengove, this was not impulsive offending arising from naivety. That explains the lesser reduction. I then reduced the sentences further to take account of her personal mitigation. I then reduced the sentence on count 9 to reflect her credit. Finally, I take account of totality. I do this by making the sentences on counts 8 and 9 concurrent with each other and other sentences, and by further reducing the sentences on counts 5 to 7. Eleanor Williams, please stand up. These are the sentences that you will serve. On count 1, there will be a sentence of 6 months imprisonment. On counts 3 to 5, the sentence will be 3 years imprisonment, concurrent on each count, but consecutive to the sentence on count 1, giving a total so far of 3.5 years. There will be sentences of 5 years on counts 5, 6 and 7, concurrent with one another, but consecutive to the sentences already imposed. Finally, there will be a sentence of 1 year and 3 months imprisonment on count 8 and 6 months imprisonment on count 9. Those sentences to run concurrently with each other and the other sentences imposed. That gives a total sentence of 8.5 years imprisonment. You will serve half of the total sentence of imprisonment in custody, after which you will be released on licence. The days spent in custody will count towards your sentence. You've spent 361 days on a qualifying curfew. Because of that, the time you must spend in custody is reduced by 179 days. If that figure is incorrect, it can be corrected later without a further hearing. On release, your licence will be subject to conditions. If you breach the terms of your licence, you'll be liable to be recalled to serve the remainder of the sentence. There is an application for a serious crime prevention order. I find that this is a serious offence for the purposes of this application. There are reasonable grounds for believing that the order will protect the public. I exercise my discretion in favour of making the order as sought, with amendments to the effect that she may also possess a tablet and games console, and that you may also be able to operate a work and a personal email. That order will run for a period of 5 years from the 17th of February 2025. I order deprivation and destruction of the items on page 1 of divider 8 of the Crown's bundle of documents. If the statutory surcharge applies, the order can be drawn up in the appropriate amount. Thank you. Sit down, please.
So that is the sentencing at the Crown Court, Preston Crown Court, an extraordinary case. Just to remind you, this was Eleanor Williams, the 22-year-old, who had accused falsely a grooming gang, 3 men, of rape allegations. The 3 men then tried to take their own lives, and as we heard from the judge, then there was the backlash, if you like, in Barrow and Furness, public demonstrations, the smashing of restaurants, death threats to local restaurateurs, to local journalists, and even attempts to find the home addresses of police amidst fears or allegations that there was some kind of cover-up. We've just heard the judge go through the sentencing to come to a total of 8.5 years, half of that to be served in custody, half when she is then released on licence. Let's speak now to Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, who's with us in the studio, has been following this extraordinary case. And just to remind people who may just be joining us, Mark, she even went to the lengths of injuring herself with a hammer, as we saw in the photos, and then she released those on social media, on Facebook, alleging that she'd been abused and injured by this grooming gang.
Yeah, this was in May of 2020 when that image was posted on social media and really led to widespread prominence of this issue and a lot of outrage. A campaign that was launched, Justice for Ellie, raised some £22,000. There were multiple protests in Barrow itself. We do have the image of Ellie, which of course is graphic in nature. It was used by the prosecution in the case, it showed how feelings, of course, were stirred up in that community, and people came to protest in Barrow from throughout the country.
Vigilantes, as the judge described it. This was self-inflicted. They found the hammer later with her blood on it. And even, I think, the judge referring to a fingertip that had been partially severed, that was also self-inflicted. Extraordinary. And yet, in his summing up, indicating no real evidence of psychological or psychiatric mitigation, despite the defence trying to say there was PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes, as always with these court cases, you'll get psychiatrists who are asked to testify for prosecution and for the defence. The prosecution psychiatrist really came to the conclusion, and the judge agreed with this, that there was no underlying psychiatric issue, that she was immature, that she had anger issues. The defence, on the other hand, said that there was an underlying post-traumatic stress disorder that had stemmed from some kind of trauma in childhood, although that was never presented by the defence in any form of mitigation.
And the judge saying no explanation and no significant sign of remorse, he said, on these false accusations. And we heard the damage that was caused as a result. 3 men attempting to take their own lives as a result. Yeah,
I mean, it was quite a complex set of allegations. So there was obviously that Facebook post in 2020 claiming that she had been the victim of an Asian grooming gang in Barrow. That got a lot of publicity, as I say. But there was also separate allegations of multiple people that had committed offences against her, rape and other sexual offences. Now, they included individuals of Asian, Pakistani extraction, people who were white. All of these individuals falsely accused, but their lives turned upside down. And 3 of those people who gave evidence in her trial, Jordan Trengove, Oliver Garner and also Mohammed Ramsan, said that they had tried to kill themselves. Such was the effect on their lives. Mohammed Ramsan saying that his car was smashed up, tyres slashed, his house windows were repeatedly smashed in.
Family had to move out of his home.
Yep.
There's business going bust. And he tried to kill himself in front of his family, the judge was saying.
Yeah, in very disturbing circumstances. Yeah. And Jordan Trengove likewise tried to take his own life. A rapist was painted on his door. Windows were smashed. He was also subject of a prolonged hate campaign. And the issue, of course, is, as the judge said in his sentencing remarks, with such serious allegations, even when an individual is cleared in a court of law, there are those who still harbour suspicions.
Yes.
So they're never, ever properly clear
the stain
of these
stays.
In the mind of it. Yeah, absolutely.
And just to look at the wider picture, I mean, the judge saying she cannot be held responsible for the criminal activity of others, i.e. the reaction to what happened. But, I mean, it was an extraordinary reaction from the community, Barrow in Furness. Public demonstrations, local businesses, including an Indian restaurant, had its windows smashed, death threats to local restaurateurs, to local journalists, subject, he said, to credible threats. Even police attempts to find their home address because the allegations had been some kind of cover-up.
Yeah, and so after the image was posted on Facebook, police recorded 150 more crimes than they would normally record in that period. 83 of those offences, they said, were hate crimes. So, yes, it had a very significant negative impact on the local community, as you can understand.
Yeah.
And one of the sort of wider implications, of course, of all of this is when someone makes up allegations like this, it undermines the very legitimate concerns and allegations, not allegations, but crimes that have been committed against bona fide victims right up and down the country of grooming gangs or of, you know, sexual offences more generally. anytime someone makes false allegations like this.
Yeah, so as the judge said, undermining public confidence in the judicial system, hence the fact that she was charged with basically perverting the course of justice and found guilty of that, which normally wouldn't attract such a stiff sentence, but clearly he was explaining how to balance the totality of this, was the phrase he used, because of the impact her actions had.
Yeah, I mean, it is quite a significant sentence. Yeah. And he said he didn't really have case law in terms of other cases to draw on because it was such
extraordinary circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What it does, I think, raise once again, though, is the issue of anonymity for those accused of serious sexual offences. There are those who believe that those who are accused of rape and other serious sexual offences should have the same kind of anonymity that is offered to victims. Now, that's a highly emotive and contentious issue. There are those victims advocates, victims campaigners, prosecutors, the police and the like, who will say that, look, you know,
it encourages others to come forward if you don't.
It can do, not always. Yeah. But sometimes if you have an allegation of sexual offence against an individual, one victim that is making that allegation, it can be quite difficult.
To ruin their lives, as you've heard. Yeah.
But it can be quite difficult to actually mount a successful prosecution with one he said, she said type allegation. Yeah. But of course, if a victim's, if a suspect's name is in the public domain after they've been charged, it can encourage other potential victims to come forward and strengthen a prosecution. But of course, it does have very, very serious, long-lasting consequences for those that are accused and then later cleared of such an allegation.
Yeah. Mark, thank you very much indeed for taking us through a very distressing and complex case. And, of course, we'll be getting more reaction, particularly from that community in Barrow-in-Furness coming up. But let's get an update now on all the other headlines this lunchtime. Tamsin's waiting for us.
Thanks very much, Mark. It's 12:32. Here are the headlines from the GB newsroom. A woman has been sentenced to 8.5 years in prison for perverting the course of justice after falsely accusing a number of men of rape. 22-year-old Eleanor Williams also made a Facebook post alleging she had been a victim of an Asian grooming gang. The court heard how 3 men she falsely accused attempted to take their own lives. Her accusations led to protests in her hometown of Barrow-in-Furness, with some businesses forced to close. She'll have to serve half of the sentence in prison. The Chancellor is looking at increasing the lifetime pension allowance in an attempt to reverse the trend of early retirements. It's understood Jeremy Hunt is considering allowing individuals to put more money into their pension pot before being taxed. The current lifetime allowance stands at just over £1 million, with savers incurring tax after that personal pension pot threshold has been exceeded. The measures are expected to be unveiled at tomorrow's budget as the Chancellor looks to increase Britain's workforce to help stimulate the economy. The Prime Minister and US President have discussed increased assertiveness from China with an agreed approach to engage and maintain talks with the country. Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden met in San Diego alongside the Australian Prime Minister to announce a new submarine programme between the 3 countries. Mr Sunak outlined security steps in the UK, with the leaders discussing the importance of working together for global stability. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat told GB News it requires a multi-agency government effort to tackle the threat from China.
The AUKUS element, the defence element that the Prime Minister was in San Diego signing, is only one aspect of it, and there's much more about this to come. So this is a whole-of-government approach. It involves education, it involves the police, it involves so many different aspects of our intelligence services that this is a huge, I'm afraid, challenge. It's true, because there are some areas where we've got to engage. We've got to engage with our eyes wide open, and this is something I've always said. We mustn't be naive. There were certainly some people who may have been in recent decades.
Job vacancies in the UK have fallen for the 8th month in a row as firms hold off from recruiting due to economic pressures. The Office for National Statistics has found the rate of UK unemployment has remained unchanged at 3.7% in the 3 months to January. It said real pay continues to fall despite a drop in the inflation rate. TV, online and DAB Plus radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back now to GB News Live with a Cold War that seems to be hotting up. China accusing the UK, US and Australia of, quote, going down a dangerous road after that agreement reached by the three powers in San Diego to develop a new generation of nuclear-powered submarines. Well, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said that pact arose from a typical Cold War mentality, and Beijing has accused the three countries of completely ignoring the concerns of the international community. Well, here, Security Minister Tom Tugendhat has not ruled out weaponising TikTok by banning the Chinese social media app as relations with the West appear to worsen still further. Well, joining us now, Defence Editor of the Evening Standard, Robert Fox. Robert, thanks for being with us. I know we've had to wait for the sentencing there at the Crown Court. But clearly the Chinese trying to adopt the moral high ground, this, or high dudgeon at least. They must have known what was coming down the slipway, though, from San Diego.
Somebody said on a very famous occasion, which you and I just about might remember, they would, wouldn't they? This is also part of the warfare, the information war. Of course, the Chinese are angry about this because it's one thing where the Western allies, and particularly the three we're talking about, US, UK and Australia, potentially have a real advantage over China. The submarine technology, the submarine warfare conception, the whole package, is at least 15 years ahead of China, according to reliable calculations. And remember, China is really going gangbusters on building up its naval presence, particularly across that part of the world. They are building the equivalent of the entire Royal Navy every 4 years at the moment.
That's extraordinary, isn't it? And we assume that this is to do with that, as you say, Indo-Pacific region, particularly, of course, with the sabre rattling over Taiwan. But looking at, I mean, the FT has looked into this in some detail. These subs presumably won't be with us for another 20 years plus. And by then, the issue of Taiwan could be, well, pretty hot, should we say?
Oh, yes, indeed, Mark. It's one element of it, and a very important one. But if you read the FT, again, which has excellent regional coverage of this, one of the things that they're getting really worried about is undersea. We've heard about the Chinese acquiring these atolls, building up artificial islands, turning them into bases. But what is worrying is their potential interference with underwater cabling, in which carries trillions of dollars worth of transactions by the day. And there's Chinese activity in looking at the cables right across the wider area over which they are claiming hegemony, control in other words. This is the thing that is causing really concern, and this is where the subs come in. These particular subs, this breed that they're building, are of excellent value on this, and it won't just start when they start building submarines in Australia. There'll be an Anglo-Australian submarine built in UK with a lot of money going into BAE systems and to Rolls-Royce. But of course, there will also be, we're now sending British and American submarines to Australia.
Yeah, and just looking at that, I mean, again, the FT indicating, I think they've taken on an extra 7,000 workers in Barrow and Furness to build the current class of subs. I think there's 17 boats on the build sheet in the United States. So there's obviously a bit of a squeeze to actually get these delivered and into service.
It's part of the story. It's not that the British design is bad. In fact, it's really rather good. And it's half a generation ahead of the American. But the point that you've raised, and hasn't been raised a lot, is the logjam in the construction yards in the US. I mean, the class that they're looking at, the Virginia, if you look at your Wikipedia, they claim they're going to build 66 of them. But I doubt if they'll build 66 of them all told. There are 22 at sea or ready to go to sea at the moment. But it's a very good deal for Britain because it wanted to complete the class of the Astute, which is now there, with an 8th hull, which we just couldn't afford. Actually, we're going to get the equivalent of the 8th as we build with Australia. By the way, Australian crews are coming over there and already serving with us.
Right. And just to be clear for people watching and listening, when we talk about these nuclear subs, it's not necessarily nuclear armed, it's the nuclear power plant, which obviously allows them to stay undersea for longer periods.
Forever, if necessary. The only thing that really needs refueling in an Astute submarine is the crew, with food and exercise, of course, and things like that. They are particularly good. And actually, the Brit submarine has a little bit more endurance and legs on it, as it were, than even the Virginias. Back to your point, it's nuclear propulsion, not nuclear armed. But this is one of the closest kept secrets in the current military scene. There was a deal in 1958 where Britain and America went into a mutual defence pact, as it was called, where they would share nuclear propulsion secrets. And they've stuck to that. And what we've got here is the Australians say, actually, for what we need, we really like a bit of that. And that's why it won't go beyond these three. It is an ironclad pact.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your expert assessment as ever. Good to speak to you again. And, of course, we'll update you as we get more from the Chinese and whether, in fact, the whole issue of TikTok now is going to be looked at by the British security services. But let's return now to Preston Crown Court after that sentencing of Eleanor Williams over the false rape claims and hear from one of her victims, Jordan Trengrove.
With my life a little bit, but I'm also going to have the thought in my head that it's only 2 years of my life till she's free again. So as bad as it sounds, I do think I'm going to move out of the area, and so I'm not in the same area as when she's released.
And Jordan, you said previously that you've got one big question, which is why. I don't know if you feel like you've got any answer to that.
No, I've got no answer to why. I'd still love to know why, but we'll never know, I guess.
Does that make it worse that you have no idea why she's done this to you?
Yeah, I've always questioned that from the start, and I would love to know why this has happened and what's made her do this and why me. Out of everyone, why me?
Do you think she has any sense of it?
No, she had no remorse on her face when it was the impact statements were being wrote out or anything, so she's still going along with it. She still believes herself. All we can do is just hope time changes. No, none at all. After what she's done to me, I'll never have any sympathy for her, ever. Her and her family have destroyed me and mine.
Do you feel that you can now walk the streets of Barrow with any confidence in it?
A little bit. Not fully, but a little bit. Because everyone's still going to have their thoughts on it. She's still going to have her believers, and mud always sticks.
Yeah.
I am taking action against the police, yes, because as bad as it is, I do blame them as much as Ellie, because there was evidence there that I didn't do anything wrong, and they still consisted on sending me to prison.
Jordan Trengrove there, one of the victims of Eleanor Williams, who falsely accused 3 men of rape and being part of a grooming gang. All 3 of them attempted to take their own lives as a result, as we heard then from Jordan Trengrove. Mud sticks, and indicating that he is considering action against the police too after he was arrested and imprisoned on those false allegations. More reaction to come on that. But now let's reflect on the thousands of junior doctors still on the picket lines across the country. The second day of their strike action today, with health leaders warning that the NHS is facing high pressure, as they said, as a result of these walkouts. Well, the leaders have blamed the Health Secretary Steve Barclay for triggering the 3-day strike this week by ignoring their concerns and being, as they said, dismissive of their demands for improved pay. Let's cross to Eastbourne District General Hospital now on the south coast and speak to our South East of England reporter Ray Addison. And Ray, of course, this particular area vital for the care of more elderly patients and all those waiting for treatment, with the waiting list having been pretty long already after the COVID epidemic.
Absolutely, Mark. Yes, here in across the southeast, obviously a very high proportion of elderly people, and with the junior doctors going on strike for this 3-day period, other more senior doctors and medics have been drafted in to cover for them. And of course, that's not just in hospitals, but that's in community health settings as well. Now, the British Medical Association has likened the government's treatment of junior doctors to abuse. They say that in real terms, their pay has actually fallen over the last 15 years by 26%. And this walkout, obviously the longest ever strike by junior doctors, is designed to teach Steve Barclay a well overdue lesson. They say never to disrespect them again. Now, Dr. James Collins is a junior doctor in his 7th year. He's an anaesthetist. He joins me now. Dr. Collins, thank you very much. Now, it's quite an angry tone from the BMA. What's the experience like for junior doctors currently?
I mean, you know, there is a palpable sense of anger within the doctors. I mean, I think anyone would be angry who's had a 26% pay cut over the last 15 years. You know, the doctors are, our most junior doctors are, they are coming out of university after 5 or 6 years at university with £80,000 to £100,000 worth of debt, and they're getting £14 an hour to be, you know, have life-saving. They're making day in, day out decisions. You know, they are saving lives every day, and they're doing all that for £14 an hour.
Now, the pay demand from the BMA is 35%. That may seem a lot to our listeners and our viewers. How can you justify that?
I mean, it seems a lot because, you know, that's how much the pay has been cut in real terms. You know, for our most junior doctors, that will be changing from £14 an hour to £19 an hour. So they'll be the ones who are on the wards, might be on the first person to arrive when someone's heart stops beating, trying to restart their heart. On the other end of the scale, you have people who have been doctors for up to 10 years on £28 an hour, and these can be, you know, neurosurgeons who are taking out brain tumours, and we're asking for them to have £38 an hour. You know, that's less than you might pay a plumber, and ultimately, you know, we are good value at the moment, and we would remain really good value for the NHS even with full pay restoration.
I mean, of course, you mentioned, you know, the sort of pay that a plumber might receive. Of course, they're going to be working ad hoc hours. They're not guaranteed to be working 40 hours a week, and so it's a difficult comparison.
I mean, you know, that is fair, but one of the things to bear in mind is that with the junior doctors, you know, we have compulsory nights and weekends, and that all forms part of our salary and the remuneration. And at the moment, you know, we have had an overwhelming ballot result which says that people don't think that remuneration is enough. And, you know, for myself, I've been, you know, actively poached. You know, I've had numerous emails from Australia and New Zealand trying to get me to go over to the Southern Hemisphere. You know, it's no wonder people are doing it when they can offer better pay and working conditions.
Well, the government has been very critical of the BMA. They say that they should have suspended this strike and entered into meaningful negotiations. How do you respond to that?
I mean, from our perspective, our door is always open for negotiations without preconditions. You know, just over a week ago, we had our chairs had a meeting with Steve Barclay where he told them that he had no mandate to negotiate on pay. And just under a week ago, they had a meeting where he didn't turn up, where we were basically promised an unknown box of you know, negotiation without any offer on the table, but we had to call off the strikes. And ultimately, you know, if they came to us with an offer on the table and actually came to the negotiating table without preconditions, we would be there in a shot.
Dr. Collins, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Mark, have no doubt this strike has and is causing mass disruption across the NHS. Junior doctors make up a massive 45% of the NHS's medical workforce. And as I was saying, obviously, that's not just hospitals, that's across community settings as well, all across not just the South East, but all of England.
Yeah, and clearly they're still determined with those placards, as you said, the brain surgeon who earns less than a plumber in terms of hourly rate, which sort of puts it in context. Ray, thanks for updating us there on the South Coast at Eastbourne. More, of course, throughout the afternoon. Let's reflect now on disgraced former pop star Gary Glitter, who's been recalled to prison after breaching his licensing conditions. The singer released from prison in early February after serving half of his 16-year sentence for sexually abusing 3 schoolgirls. Well, after release, he was subject to licence conditions, including a GPS tag. Let's get more with our reporter Paul Hawkins outside the Ministry of Justice. And Paul, clearly then what happened was focused, I think, on a bail hostel where he was allegedly or suspect trying to get onto the dark web, as they call it.
Yeah, allegedly. That's been widely reported in the media, captured on a recording trying to access the dark web, which for those who don't know, it's kind of like the hidden part of the internet where a lot of criminality takes place, where known paedophiles can exchange images of children. The Ministry of Justice only confirming that he had been collected from that bail hostel in southern England yesterday, taken back to HMP the Verne. That's a low security category C prison in Dorset, but no more than that. So it's only allegedly that we can say the reason as to why he was collected and taken away for a breach of his licence. He'd only served half of his jail term, 8 years out of 16, released last February on licence for those offences, which include attempted rape, 4 counts of indecent assault and 1 of having sex with a girl under 13, relating to attacks on 2 girls aged 12 and 13 during his career when he lured them to his dressing room, and then in 1975 attempted rape with a girl who was actually under the age of 10 at the time. So that was when he then went on to be sentenced in 2015. He's only served half his jail sentence. It's now for the parole board to assess whether he will be re-released. This morning, the former head of Scotland Yard's paedophile unit, Mike Hames, has said the disgraced pop star will always represent a danger to children after he was recalled to prison, calling him arrogant, dangerous, and so fixated on his offending behaviour that, in his opinion, he'll never stop.
Thank you very much indeed for that outside, as we see some pictures, of course, of Glitter when I think he returned from Vietnam, and then, of course, the sentencing that took place here. Well, let's get more reaction now with the women rights campaigner Aisha Ali, who joins us. Aisha, are you taking some comfort? Well, Mike Hames said that, the former head of the Scotland Yard paedophile unit, he believes that Glitter, now aged 78, will likely spend the rest of his life in prison.
Oh, absolutely. I think Mr. Hames obviously was head of the paedophile unit at the Met. He investigated him. He obviously took many witness statements, and he interviewed Gary Glitter. So he got to know Gary Glitter on a different level, more intimate level than, say, you and me and everybody else. And if this person said that Gary Glitter will never stop offending, we need to believe him. I think it was only going to be a matter of time. I think he should never have been released halfway through his sentence. And lo and behold, he has tried to return to his offending. He has tried to access, like your reporter said, the dark web in order to access...
We should just... I'll just interrupt you. Obviously, that's the allegation. We don't know that for certain, but clearly it's enough for them to recall him on licence. And does this bring into question the role of the parole board in actually taking the decision to release him in the first place?
Absolutely. I think... we need to take a look at the entire system that's in place, especially when it comes to people like Gary Glitter, who are just so, like Mr. Hames said, fixated with their offending. These people they're lifelong perpetrators. They will never change. And he has had decades to do what he wanted to do with many people, many children, and get away with it. I mean, we obviously talk about the 3 schoolgirls that helped get their testimony that resulted in a conviction for Gary Glitter, but there must have been many more. And obviously when he went abroad to Vietnam and Cambodia, and the victims that he's left behind. So this is a person who will never change. He has never shown any remorse for what he has done. He will constantly be seeking any opportunity to constantly reoffend and carry on committing those crimes. So, of course, I think the likelihood of him dying in prison is actually going to make keep people safe, especially young people, young children. And I think that's a positive.
Right. Aisha Ali, thank you very much indeed for bringing your reaction to that, of course, and we shall continue to follow that particular case, as we heard from Paul, suspected to be now back in that open jail in Dorset. Stay with us. Coming up in this next hour, more on the extraordinary case of Eleanor Williams, a woman who falsely accused 3 men of rape in a grooming gang and the toll it took on their lives. Updating on that in just a moment. Weather for you next.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
we've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
A very good afternoon. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Tuesday lunchtime, 22-year-old Eleanor Williams jailed for 8.5 years after falsely claiming to have been a victim of an Asian grooming gang. Our Home and Security editor Mark White joining us in the studio to explain the human cost of her allegations. The Cold War with China heats up. It's condemning the US, UK and Australia for a new arms race, as it says, in the pact to build new nuclear-powered submarines. And could Britain now weaponise TikTok? We'll be updating you on that. Pension boost or yet more pain? Everyone's got their take on tomorrow's budget. We'll be trying to find out for you what, for Jeremy from Accounts, as he's been called, really's got up his sleeve. You may want to have a glass of wine handy before that goes up too. 45 pence a bottle, maybe. And disgraced pop star Gary Glitter will probably die in jail. That's according to the former head of Scotland Yard's paedophile unit. Glitter, real name Paul Gadd, recalled to prison after reportedly trying to access the dark web in his bail hostel. But right now, let's get the latest headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thanks very much. Good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 2 minutes past 1. A woman's been sentenced to 8.5 years in prison for perverting the course of justice after falsely accusing a number of men of rape. 22-year-old Eleanor Williams also made a Facebook post alleging she'd been a victim of an Asian grooming gang. Preston Crown Court heard how 3 men she falsely accused attempted to take their own lives. Her accusations led to protests in her hometown of Barrow-in-Furness, with some businesses forced to close. She'll serve half the sentence behind bars. Jordan Trengove, one of Eleanor's victims who was wrongly accused of rape, says he doesn't think the sentence is long enough.
I think she has any remorse. I looked back a few times while the judge was speaking and there was just no remorse shown, so well, I've tried ending my life over it. I've had a bond with my son. I've not been able to leave the house. I've not been able to go to work, you know, so it's just, now I know she's locked away for a bit longer, it's just a bit of a relief, but I wish it was longer a sentence.
The Chancellor is looking at increasing the lifetime pension allowance in an attempt to reverse the trend of early retirements. It's understood Jeremy Hunt is considering allowing individuals to put more money into their pension pot before being taxed. The current lifetime allowance stands at just over £1 million, with savers incurring tax after the personal threshold has been exceeded. The measures are expected to be unveiled at tomorrow's budget as the Chancellor looks to increase Britain's workforce to help stimulate the economy. The Prime Minister and US President have discussed increased assertiveness from China with an agreed approach to engage and maintain talks with the country. Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden met in San Diego alongside the Australian Prime Minister to announce a new submarine programme between the 3 countries. Mr Sunak outlined security steps in the UK, with the leaders discussing the importance of working together for global stability. The President says he intends to visit Northern Ireland in April, whilst the Prime Minister has been invited to Washington in June. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat told GB News it requires a multi-agency government effort to tackle the threat from China.
The AUKUS element, the defence element that the Prime Minister was in San Diego signing, is only one aspect of it, and there's much more about this to come. So this is a whole-of-government approach. It involves education, it involves the police, it involves so many different aspects of our intelligence services that this is a huge, I'm afraid, challenge. It's true, because there are some areas where we've got to engage. We've got to engage with our eyes wide open, and this is something I've always said. We mustn't be naive. There were certainly some people who may have been in recent decades.
New figures show job vacancies have fallen for the 8th month in a row as firms hold off from recruiting due to economic pressures. The Office for National Statistics has found the rate of UK unemployment has remained unchanged at 3.7% in the 3 months to January. It says real pay continues to fall despite a drop in the inflation rate. Tens of thousands of appointments and operations are expected to be cancelled as strikes by junior doctors enters its second day. NHS leaders say the 72-hour action is putting emergency care under significant pressure also. The British Medical Association says junior doctors in England have suffered a 26% real terms cut to their pay. Last week, the Health Secretary invited the BMA to talks, but the union rejected them due to unacceptable preconditions imposed by the government. New figures show only a fraction of police officers facing complaints over their treatment of women were sacked. National Police Chiefs Council data shows of the 1,500 officers and staff accused of violence against women and girls, just 1% left the force. It also found more than 1,000 complaints were made against police conduct in a 6-month period. Complaints relate to various allegations against police in England and Wales between October 2021 and March 2022, including sexual harassment. Paedophile and former pop star Gary Glitter has been sent back to jail for breaking bail conditions less than 6 weeks after being released. The 78-year-old had been freed last month after being jailed in 2015 for sexually abusing 3 schoolgirls. He had served 8 years behind bars after serving half of his 16-year sentence. Sir Brian May has suggested he could go on tour again this year as he was awarded a knighthood by the King. The lead guitarist for the band Queen is known for some of the most iconic riffs in popular music, including the famous solo on Don't Stop Me Now. The musician's been awarded the honours at Buckingham Palace after being recognised for his services to music and charity. He called it a very special occasion. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Now let's update you on this extraordinary case that we've heard at Preston Crown Court with the sentencing of Eleanor Williams. She's been jailed for 8.5 years, half of that, though, to be served on licence, for perverting the course of justice. Now, the 22-year-old falsely claiming that she was a victim of an Asian grooming gang, making a series of false rape allegations. In May 2022, she'd posted on Facebook to claim she'd been beaten, abused and trafficked by Asian men, sharing a photo of her injuries. But the court heard those injuries had been self-inflicted using a hammer. And, of course, then the cost of what happened to her 3 victims who attempted to kill themselves. So joining us now in the studio, Home and Security Editor Mark White. Mark, an extraordinary case, and we heard from the judge in that summing up. No significant signs of remorse and no explanation as to why she'd done this.
Yeah, and in fact, she made allegations against more than 3 people. It's 3 people who felt so traumatised by what had been alleged against them that they had tried to take their own lives. But there were multiple people, complex set of allegations, really. She had claimed that, yes, she was a victim of an Asian grooming gang of Pakistani men. She posted this Facebook picture, which I think we have. It's disturbing, but it's a graphic illustration of the length she went to. She got a hammer and smashed her face, effectively, with this hammer. And that showed a lot of bruising around her face as well. She was even seen on CCTV footage out there buying the hammer in a local supermarket, which shows, Mark, the level of premeditation, clearly, that she had gone to
because obviously
before these crimes.
Yeah, the court would have been trying to assess, was there some kind of psychological disorder? And this is where she's actually buying that hammer. And that sort of closed eye, she did that to herself. The court also hearing that she had a partially severed finger, again self-inflicted, and claiming that this had been done to her by this grooming gang. Now, the reaction was that we had this huge sort of almost like a vigilante gang, as the judge said, in Barrow-in-Furness.
Yeah, there was an elaborate set of allegations that were made over a period of time, and that included the allegations of this Asian grooming gang active in the Barrow-in-Furness area, which the police clearly took seriously for a time until they bottomed this out. But when that Facebook post was made, understandably, people were shocked, and there was a backlash, and some of those accused found themselves on the receiving end of that backlash, with their homes, windows being smashed, car tires being slashed, rapists being painted on their doors. They've gone through hell, and they say that still, in the eyes of many people in Barrow, mud sticks, and they feel that these allegations will hang over them for a long period of time. We've just heard from Mohammed Ramsan, who's a local businessman from Barrow, one of those accused. This is what he said outside Preston Crown Court.
No sense of triumph, only sadness. For the loss of the years, the impact on my family, here we are, and the true impact that this will have on true victims. That's the loss here of slavery and sexual abuse. As a father and an uncle, to my amazing girls, this fills me with profound sadness. The word profound, that's profound sadness, this is. Only the love and unwavering support from my family enabled me to endure this nightmare. To give me the strength I needed, because I didn't need a lot of strength. These are the people that you left in the family. To carry on, for which I'm truly thankful, because there was a fight that we had to fight. So I'm not sure how my family and I are going to recover from this. The mud sticks, and I fear it may take some time. But as a family, we remain strong, and we will be strong. And we're determined to move forward positively with our lives. We're not, and we won't be leaving Barrow. We will be still remaining in Barrow-in-Furness, because that's where I belong. It's concerning, because it's still out there. There is people out there on social media. The family's doing a campaign of that. It's still the truth, and there's still people on social media, and this goes to the far right element of people are still portraying this actually exists and this happened, and it hasn't. It doesn't. The impact is what we've been through. It's difficult. It's been hard. It's very impacted. It's impacted us all in different ways, in different manners. But that's now. We've got to think about moving forward. Forward.
Yeah, short statement from her in court saying that she'd made some mistakes and she's sorry. She was young and confused. I'm not saying guilty, but I know I've done some wrong. What do you say to that?
Jason, there you can see there's been plenty of time to stop and realise where I've done wrong. I hold my hands up. You know, like I said, I'm no angel, and in the past I've spoken about with you at length and hold your hands up. That's the best thing to do. And the train left the station far too before they could actually tell the truth. Thank you. Yes, there is. Yes, there is, and we have mentioned this to the MP, Simon Fell, and there is things that we are working on ourselves as a campaign. We are taking on a campaign to change the social media laws in the UK. We are looking at that as a family, and we are setting up. We've set up a foundation. We are working on moving forward because of this. I've had actual victims come out to me, real victims of abuse, real victims of wrongly arrested, wrongly accused, because of the way
problem, isn't it?
It's a huge problem. It is a problem. It's a true problem. And I'm not taking the facts away from real victims. The real victims do exist. There is issues of grooming, there's sexual problem, but how are we as a government, as a country, how the balance is, it's not right. It's not right. And the support...
And our boys, protecting our boys from this in the future. It's a massive worry. That girl's, she's been able to say this and falsify all this evidence, and we've gone through this for 3.5 years, and our life has been put through the mill, and luckily we are strong and we've got through it.
And that's one thing we'd like to say, thank you, because this one thing has taught us as a family, we are strong. We are unbreakable, and we're a strong family, and that's the way. I love my children. I love my parents. Priceless. Priceless.
Yeah, you've got to take a positive from what's happened rather than a negative.
8.5 years enough?
That's the judge's decision. I was just happy with the guilty verdict.
Well, the Ramsan family there indicating the cost, of course, of what had happened. Just to reiterate with Mark here in the studio, he tried to take his own life in front of his family, who we saw there, and coming out with that phrase, as Jordan Trengrove, the other victim, had mud sticks. Clearly they are still suffering as a result of this, but he's indicating they're going to stay in the area. Jordan Trengrove indicating he may try and move on because of the legacy that this has had.
Yeah, and Jordan Trengrove saying that he has no sympathy for Ellie Williams at all, that she, as far as he's concerned, has shown no remorse during this. And yes, like Mohammed Ramsan, he has tried to take his own life as well. He said it's had an irreparable impact on his life.
And a very interesting point brought up by Mohammed Ramsan then about the role of social media, which led to, of course, all this reaction in Barrow and Furness, and also the question of anonymity in these cases, where the rape allegations, where, of course, the alleged perpetrator does not get automatic anonymity.
Yeah, I mean, there's two issues there. There's clearly the wider public reaction to allegations about Asian grooming gangs. Now, we know that there is a specific problem in towns and cities right across the country. Mohammed Ramsan said that as well. He doesn't want to diminish from that, but he doesn't want people to rush to judgment on people as well. Now, clearly, she made those specific allegations about being the victim of an Asian grooming gang. The judge said that in his assessment of the case, he doesn't think that she was racially motivated in doing that, but she wanted to get impact, she wanted to get attention, and the fact, of course, is that a number of her victims were young white men as well, so clearly it had a very significant impact. It had a wider impact because of the issue around grooming gangs, but not just on that. It had that very significant impact on these young white men as well.
Yeah, and the fact, as we heard in the sentencing, that there were credible threats, as the judge said, to local journalists who were trying to report on the case, credible threats to police, attempts to find their home addresses, because of this the sort of effect where everyone thought there was a cover-up going on in Barrow and Furness, and that they were trying to hide something.
Yeah, well, again, of course, when you have an issue about should those who are accused and charged with a crime enjoy the same kind of anonymity as a victim, well, clearly, if they're not named, then the repercussions against them are lessened, potentially. And also, of course, if they are named, then you see the consequences that these individuals have gone through. Even
so damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Even though they're wholly innocent. And as they say, mud sticks, there will be those in the community, as Jordan Trengrove said, that will still believe Ellie Williams, despite what has been played out in court, especially because she herself will not admit that all of the allegations are wrong.
From your contacts in the Home Office and people you've spoken to, do you think there will be seriously any review of this question of anonymity in these cases? Because this goes back to Cliff Richard, of course, who made the point when he was named in the Utri inquiry that, you know, until you're actually proven in court to be guilty or innocent, you should remain anonymous.
I think look, it's reviewed from time to time. Right. Whether there will be any fundamental change, I don't think so. Okay. We did get a toughening of the laws around the naming of suspects in sex allegation cases. So the media beforehand, as we saw with Cliff Richard, from the moment of arrest, the media was putting names out there, even though in quite a lot of cases, an individual then goes on and is not charged. Yeah. So now it's at the point where when someone is charged, the name is made public. Of course, those who are trying to protect the rights of those who are accused of a crime would like to see that name, you know, never put out until the point of conviction because of the consequences that we're seeing here. But I'm not sure that we're actually going to see that at the end of the day, because there are some positives from naming an individual as well, and that's, of course, that it can encourage other victims to come forward.
Mark, thank you very much indeed taking us through this extraordinary case, and more reaction, of course, from Barrow and Furness to what we've heard. Also coming up, just to remind you, it's the budget tomorrow. Our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, taking a look at the battle lines within the Tory party over tax and, of course, whether there's going to be a boost to your pension. All that coming up in a moment.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So yes, budget tomorrow, and suggestions the Chancellor may want it to be boring, just to keep everyone on side. What chance of that for Jeremy of Accounts, as he's been called by some? Well, our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, has been taking a look at the battle lines within the Tory party itself over tax.
It was Liz Truss's promise to reverse Rishi Sunak's planned rise in the tax that helped propel her to number 10. And ahead of this week's budget, Tory backbenchers are pushing the government to change tack and not raise taxes on British businesses.
By putting the tax rate up, he will experience falling revenues, not rising revenues. Every time Conservative chancellors have had the courage to cut corporation tax rates, the amount we collect has gone up. And just look at the position in the Republic of Ireland. They have a rate much lower than ours, and they collect 4 times as much business tax per head as we do, because the companies pour into Ireland to invest and set up their HQs. Well, my message to Jeremy Hunt is he's got a portrait of Nigel Lawson hanging on the wall in his study. He says he's a great admirer of Nigel Lawson. Did what Nigel did, Jeremy. Cut the taxes and you'll get more revenue and a happier country.
So how might the Chancellor respond to this pressure? One idea is to mitigate the tax rise by allowing companies to count capital investment against their corporation tax bill. Currently, a policy called the super deduction is in place, although it's due to end next month. Robert Colville of the Centre for Policy Studies believes the Chancellor would be wise to take forward a form of it to mitigate the damage of the corporation tax hike.
The super deduction has had an effect in areas like the North, in the Midlands, in sort of for manufacturing firms. I mean, the evidence is pretty good that it's helped those kind of firms, and of course those are the kind of people the government is quite keen on at the moment. Our modelling shows that in the long term, that doing that for plant and machinery probably adds 1.2% to the country's GDP at a long-term cost of about £2 or £3 billion a year.
And speaking to GBNews last week, the Chancellor hinted that this is exactly what he's looking at. Jeremy Hunt told Esther McVeigh and Philip Davies that the headline rate of tax matters less than the effective rate, the amount of tax that is actually paid.
We need to have the lowest effective corporation taxes, because the headline rate, which by the way, even at 25%, is lower than nearly all our major rivals, France, Germany, and so on. But what actually matters, because a lot of companies are allowed to count their capital expenditure against their corporation tax bill. Now, one of the ways that George Osborne reduced corporation tax headline rates was that he got rid of those capital allowances. But for manufacturing industry, such as AstraZeneca in your part of the world, those capital allowances work. So I would say we do want to bring down our effective corporation tax, the total amount people pay as corporation tax as a proportion of their profits. We do want to bring those down.
It looks like Conservative backbenchers will not get their wish for a full-scale reversal of this rise to corporation tax. But what they might get is some mitigation, a full expensing regime, which might go some way to quell some of that backbench discontent. Tom Harwood, GB News.
Well, let's get more now with Tom joining us in the studio. And Tom, normally this is like handling or managing expectation, and they produce this rabbit out of the hat. But what you're saying is it might be more of a small gerbil tomorrow than a full fluffy white rabbit.
I think that's highly likely. What we're seeing at the moment from the Treasury is stability above all else. And this has been Jeremy Hunt's mantra since he became Chancellor. He's been very keen to not do anything that might surprise markets, that might upset the apple cart, that might go along in any way with what happened at the mini-budget in the autumn of last year. And so, really, when we're looking at all of these different issues, we've had a lot of sort of previews from the Treasury and hints from the Chancellor himself. We heard him on GB News talking on Saturday about the effective rate of tax mattering more than the headline rate. A big clue that the headline rate is going to be exactly as was proposed.
Raised to 25%.
And we have heard now that from the Treasury that there are going to be investment zones, for example, 12 of them around the country. And this has been pre-briefed out to the media. We know basically what they'll look like. But I've been talking to some people in the Treasury today and digging a little deeper on what these investment zones might look precisely like. And they're very, very different from the investment zones that were proposed by Liz Truss. There are some people in Parliament who think that this policy of investment zones being briefed out today is sort of a sop from the Treasury to Conservative backbenchers, to the growth group, the Trussites, if you will, to try and win them over. But the detail of it is very different because they're more about subsidies than tax cuts. OK,
because the argument would be, obviously, that you get tax relief for investment. If your firm puts money into something, then you get the tax relief. So, as you say, your headline rate is still high, but your effective rate is lower. However, that's not going to affect sort of white van man, who can't really spend an awful lot on investing in plant plant and machinery and so on. They are a backbone of the Tory sort of electoral rump. So where does it leave them?
Yes, the corporation tax rise is very tricky for particularly those medium-sized companies. It kicks in at £50,000 a year.
Which is not
now,
that much.
If you're employing one or two people, if you're employing two people on 25 grand each, then that's your entire... there are very few companies that will actually be under that threshold. So there is a very difficult political position there, particularly for the smaller businesses, the businesses that employ a handful of people, which are often described as the backbone of the British economy. To some extent, they will be hit the hardest by this, because, of course, the largest companies will be able to do those significant investments. However, getting those companies to do those significant investments is a good thing for the economy.
Yeah, OK, to get which obviously is a major concern to get the growth going in the economy. The other thing is to getting people back into work, or at least staying at work. So we think maybe help with childcare. And then this issue about pensions, relaxing the various tax sort of lifetime allowances and so on, which is all very technical. But basically, because we've seen so many NHS consultants, for instance, leaving the profession.
Well, currently, the lifetime allowance on pensions, before you have to pay extra tax on it, is £1 million. It
sounds a lot.
It sounds a lot, but if you're a consultant in the NHS earning quite a bit, the incentive there is once you hit that £1 million threshold, you might as well retire and stop, because you're going to be punitively taxed if you try and work more.
55% rate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that if this is raised, substantially raised, from £1 million to £1.8 million, then a lot of these people who are retiring at the age of 50 might well work another 15 years.
And that's where it used to be before George Osborne cut it, let's not forget. So this goes full circle.
And indeed, these capital allowances within incorporation tax, George Osborne also got rid of them.
Yeah. OK, Tom, thank you for that. We shall see from tomorrow onwards, 11 o'clock, of course, our special programme begins here on GB News, so join us for that. Coming up, we'll have all the latest on the strikes as well. Of course, don't forget the junior doctors are still out, and also talking about the issue of police and the violence against women and why that's concerning people. First, latest headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thanks very much. It's 1:31. Here are the headlines. A woman's been sentenced to 8.5 years in prison for perverting the course of justice after falsely accusing a number of men of rape. 22-year-old Eleanor Williams also made a Facebook post alleging she had been a victim of an Asian grooming gang. Preston Crown Court heard how 3 men she falsely accused attempted to take their own lives. Her accusations led to protests in her hometown of Barrow-in-Furness, with some businesses forced to close. She'll serve half the sentence behind bars. The Chancellor is looking at increasing the lifetime pension allowance in an attempt to reverse the trend of early retirements. It's understood Jeremy Hunt is considering allowing individuals to put more money into their pension pot before being taxed. The current lifetime allowance stands at just over £1 million, with savers incurring tax after that personal pension pot threshold has been exceeded. The measures are expected to be unveiled at tomorrow's budget as the Chancellor looks to increase Britain's workforce to help stimulate the economy. The Prime Minister and US President have discussed increased assertiveness from China with an agreed approach to engage and maintain talks with the country. Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden met in San Diego alongside the Australian Prime Minister to announce a new submarine programme between the 3 countries. Mr Sunak outlined security steps in the UK, with the leaders discussing the importance of working together for global stability. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat told GB News it requires a multi-agency government effort to tackle the threat from China.
The AUKUS element, the defence element that the Prime Minister was in San Diego signing, is only one aspect of it, and there's much more about this to come. So this is a whole-of-government approach. It involves education, it involves the police, it involves so many different aspects of our intelligence services that this is a huge, I'm afraid, challenge. It's true, because there are some areas where we've got to engage. We've got to engage with our eyes wide open, and this is something I've always said. We mustn't be naive. There were certainly some people who may have been in recent decades.
Job vacancies in the UK have fallen for the 8th month in a row as firms hold off from recruiting due to economic pressures. The Office for National Statistics has found the rate of UK unemployment has remained unchanged at 3.7% in the 3 months to January. It says real pay continues to fall despite a drop in the inflation rate. TV, online, DAB+ radio and tune in. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. And let's remind you that thousands of junior doctors are still on picket lines across the country with their second day of strike action over pay and conditions. And health leaders have been warning that the NHS is facing high pressure, as they said, as a result of these walkouts. Well, the British Medical Association says that junior doctors' pay has fallen in real terms by 26% over the past 15 years, and that reversing that would now require a 35.3% pay rise. Well, on Friday, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, invited the union to talk to him, but the leaders rejected that, accusing him of being dismissive of their pay demands, insisting on unacceptable preconditions. Well, let's get more now and cross over to Eastbourne District General Hospital on the south coast and join our South East of England reporter Ray Addison, who's been updating us there. And Ray, you were speaking to one of those junior doctors earlier, making again this parallel with conditions in other forms of work. We heard initially about, of course, the baristas earning more than a junior doctor, and he was talking about a brain surgeon technically earning less than a plumber would.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yes, Mark, I was talking to Dr. Collins. He's a 7th-year junior doctor, works as an anaesthetist across the southeast of England in a number of different hospitals and clinics, and he was saying that brain surgeons are obviously going to be earning less than plumbers. I pointed out to him that, of course, brain surgeons, or rather plumbers, are not going to get a government pension and other benefits, and you don't get overtime and other things like that. And he accepted those points. But the British Medical Association is saying that the government's treatment of junior doctors over this last decade and a half has been akin to abuse. They've had, as you said, a real terms pay cut over 15 years of around 26%. 50%. And now this 3-day walkout, of which we're in the middle of now, it's the longest ever strike. It's designed to punish in many ways the government and to teach Health Secretary Steve Barclay an overdue lesson, the BMA says, never to disrespect them again. And of course it will and is having a significant impact to patients. Junior doctors, people may not be aware, make up around 45% of all NHS staff, and they don't just work in hospitals, they work in clinics and community settings, and they're psychiatrists, they work in doctors' surgeries as well. And of course tens of thousands have walked out all across England, and that is having an impact. Other consultants, senior doctors, are having to come in to replace them. Medics are being drafted in as well, and of course they have to just focus on those emergency services, things like maternity and A&E. They're where that focus is being delivered. But of course it is having a massive impact on delays to operations, and appointments have been cancelled for thousands of patients. The picket line behind me has finished for the day. They will be back tomorrow at around about 6 a.m. But earlier on I spoke to junior doctors here to find out why they're on strike.
We don't want to be out here at all, but the real terms pay cut of the 25% over the year sort of led us with no real choice than to come out here. It feels like there's nothing left for us to do when we've got our colleagues that are undervalued, underappreciated, having put all the effort in to get to the point where we are.
From a personal standpoint, I know that half of my year group at least have gone to Australia or New Zealand because it's just a more attractive place to work. It's just better hours, better pay, and obviously more sunshine. So I'm just, a bit disillusioned at the moment. And I'm one of the only people I know that's continued to go into training, and this is obviously what we need to support the NHS in the future.
Well, Mark, the British Medical Association says that 40% of their junior doctors say they plan to leave the NHS as soon as they're able to find another job. Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, has criticised the union for not joining in, for not calling off the strike to hold formal talks. And meanwhile, the Prime Minister has said that strikes like this are a good example of why he's introducing anti-strikes legislation.
OK, Ray, thank you very much indeed. And, of course, another day of action to come tomorrow, the third day, as you were saying, some 72 hours, and we'll assess the situation for you here on GB News Live. Now, let's bring you the latest figures released by the National Police Chiefs Council, showing that less than 1% of more than 1,500 police officers and staff who faced complaints about their treatment of women in a 6-month period were actually sacked. The data is showing that there were 653 conduct cases relating to alleged violence against women and girls brought against 672 individuals by police forces across England and Wales. That's between October of 2021 and March 2022. In addition, some 524 complaints made by members of the public against 867 officers and staff in the same period. Well, joining us now on the programme, Peter Blexley, former Met detective, and, of course, a familiar face here on GB News. Here we go again, because clearly the spotlight is on police behaviour at the moment. One, I think, probably should reflect that the numbers that we're talking about reflect all sorts of different allegations, even about, cuffs being put on at the point of arrest, for instance.
They do. They cover a wide plethora of allegations made against police officers, from, at the most serious extent, sexual offences and the like, and yes, down to what people classify as sort of inappropriate behaviour or matters relating to police discipline, where there may have been an overzealous use of handcuffs and the like. Regardless, this is a staggeringly low number of officers that are being drummed out of the service when evidence against them is sufficient to see them go on their way to some other form of profession.
Yeah.
And another big headline figure is that these stats, which are a year old now, and I think we need to highlight that because the police are doing so much, as they tell us, again, on this very subject, only 6% of any allegations of sexual offences is leading to somebody being charged across the whole spectrum of society.
OK, but we did have that warning from the Met Police Commissioner, of course, that more of these cases would come to court, and therefore the picture may actually change in that more is being reported. But can I ask you about, the role, for instance, of the Police Federation? Because there have been those saying that the police union, effectively, maybe has a very strong hand in preventing some of these things being taken through to a sort of industrial process of, as you say, being dismissed from the force.
Well, the Police Federation is a staff association set up to represent its members, and it has tens upon tens of thousands of members, and of course is consequently very well financed. In the past, it's been a closed shop. It's been very slow to modernise, and many people have looked at it with a strong air of suspicion. There is a whole industry around police misconduct. Not only the Police Federation, which is there to represent its members, but also, indeed, but firms of solicitors and barristers' chambers, so an office that houses many, many barristers whose sole workload is police misconduct.
Really?
Solicitors' firms set up entirely. They won't do conveyancing on buying or selling your house. They are set up entirely to deal with police conduct matters because the whole police conduct process is hideously complex,
so therefore
multi-layered.
The fee structure is actually quite attractive for them, one imagines.
And they're not short of work.
No.
Even more so now, when the police, of course, are looking inwards at themselves, trying to regain public trust and confidence, and trying to drum out those who should never be anywhere near a warrant card or a police uniform.
Is the difficulty, however, deciding, therefore, what is acceptable and what isn't in terms of physical contact? For instance, if someone is said to be resisting arrest, I guess a police officer has no option but to try and physically restrain them or put cuffs on, whatever. That may well be seen as violence against women by those who suffer such things.
Virtually every cop these days wears a body-worn video.
Oh, right,
OK.
The camera.
Yeah, indeed. And that's gone a long way towards helping some of these cases be resolved. Let's not skirt around it. Sometimes policing can be a very violent job. You do face violence, and I had to arrest women back in the day when I was a police officer who were extremely violent, but let's not have that as a distraction.
Did you, can I just ask, did you adopt a different approach? Are you trained to have a different approach in those circumstances?
Well, of course, there's a different physicality between women and men. So what is sometimes appropriate for a bodybuilding man who will bench press many hundreds of kilos is not appropriate for a slight woman who may be in a troubled state of mind and being very violent or threatening violence. Sometimes you just have to read the situation and act accordingly. But reasonable force will always be permitted.
That's the test in law. Reasonable force.
What is reasonable? And of course that will vary from circumstance to circumstance.
And just on that point of the cameras, do you think that this may actually help the process now in future, in that is effectively an independent arbiter? The picture tells the story.
And the camera never lies, so they say.
To a degree.
Indeed. Yes, it's going to help. But many of these allegations that are made by women against police officers are worryingly about them off duty, relate to coercive control, sexual offences and the like. And let's just remember, the police have only got themselves into this position because of the murderous brutality and the utterly unacceptable behaviour by members of their own. They didn't do this voluntarily. All of this reviewing and gathering all of this stats, they were shamed and forced into it.
Good point. Peter, as ever, thank you for joining us on GB News and bringing us your expert assessment of the picture, of course. And we'll see what the latest figures then come through as the circumstances change, as we were saying, in terms of the way that things are reported. Now, a man's died after that gas blast destroying a house in Swansea in South Wales. We were reporting on yesterday. 3 others taken to hospital after the explosion, shaking houses many miles away from Morriston. With South Wales Police now starting an investigation to establish the exact cause. Our reporter Will Hollis is in Swansea for us now. And Will, what has been the reaction of the community there today?
Yes, well, you can imagine, Mark, that the community is still very much in shock. It's only a little over 24 hours since this suspected gas explosion rocked Morriston here in South Wales in Swansea. Just to give you a little bit of a better look, you can see in the background there the remainder of what's supposedly 2 houses, and it is essentially just rubble now. In the last hour or two, big diggers as well as the trucks have been removing the rubble, at least from the street where overnight emergency services were moving it and trying to at least make a better state of the road. Of course, the real tragedy isn't about houses, it isn't how the roads look, it's that a man yesterday was pulled from the rubble. They recovered the body of a man who was unaccounted for until at least late in the evening. 3 other people also were taken to hospital. I'm told that one of those people still remains in hospital. Meanwhile, an adult and a teenager have been allowed to leave. It is still very much an active police investigation. There is still a large cordon here on Clydach Road where it joins onto the corner of Field Close. We've been hearing from other services, other authorities, including the Utilities Authority here for South Wales. They are still trying to figure out exactly what happened here, and while they say it is a suspected gas explosion, they aren't entirely certain. Earlier this morning when I spoke to the National Grid, they said that there is still power out for many of the homes here, but that isn't necessarily about making that connection. It's because in order to do their investigation, the power needs to be out, and that's one of the reasons why still at least 30 or so houses and the people that live in those houses have been unable to go home. There is a big response from the local authority, Swansea Council, as well as the local football club, where people have been spending the day. Meanwhile, the local authority has been providing accommodation for them overnight. But this is still very much an ongoing investigation, and I don't think we'll have the answers for this today or potentially for the coming few days. But here, at least, the community is still trying to figure out exactly what happened yesterday.
Yeah, and of course, obviously, they won't be let back in until they're absolutely sure that they can be safe. And we can see people with the high-vis jackets behind you continuing that work. And one assumes that with the sort of terracing there, that, you know, a lot of people will know each other, quite a close community perhaps. This will have quite an impact on them.
Yes, of course. I've been speaking to a few of the people that are on this road. You can actually probably see there's a bit of smoke here that because there is such a large amount of dust, but they've been saying that they know the gentleman. While police have not formally identified and announced who that gentleman was, they said that he was a real gentleman, the kind of guy that would don his cap to people as they went past, and he was somebody that was described as really lovely. So there is a loss here in this quite close-knit community.
Will, thank you very much indeed for updating us there. And, of course, we'll update people as and when the safety checks continue and people return to their homes. Now, tomorrow, yes, it's the budget, the spring budget, and we've got Jeremy Hunt set to make a number of announcements, including perhaps on corporation tax, but what will happen, and, of course, the energy price guarantee as well, and the whole issue of pensions. But some of the announcements are already receiving a bit of assessment or reaction, experts arguing that the pension changes might help with labour shortages, but do little to solve health issues, keeping the over 50s from returning to work. Official figures from the Office of National Statistics today telling us that Britons are off work due to long-term sickness at record highs. Well, let's get the fuller picture now with our business and economics editor Liam Halligan joining us with On the Money. And we were told that Jeremy from Accounts would quite like to have a boring budget. Fat chance of that, I suspect.
I think Jeremy Hunt will put forward a budget that's boring. I think he will try and present that as a virtue, particularly, Mark, because amidst all this speculation about the budget, now Gary Lineker's not dominating the front pages, what we've still got going on is a lot of financial turmoil linked to the failure of this bank in America, with other banking stocks down sharply and regulators on both sides of the pond, if you like, not just the UK and the US, but across Europe too, and indeed in Asia, concerned. But we'll just park that. I just want to mark that is happening in case that story develops. So let's go back to the budget. So I do think it will be a kind of multifaceted budget tomorrow. We've had leaks in the newspapers today that the pension, the lifetime allowance on pension saving may be raised from 1.1 to 1.8 million. I have to say, this will affect, a handful of people. This doesn't help you if you're suffering from the cost of living crisis, worried about your food shopping and the cost of filling up your van.
But there was a particular point about this, of course, and this was the so-called consultants tax. That an awful lot of NHS consultants were throwing the towel in early because they were going to get this 55% tax charge. And suggestions are this is tying into this idea that Jeremy Hunt's want people to stay at work and to keep being productive, effectively.
Oh, well and good, and there may be some merit in that, but it's not exactly something that's going to be, widely hailed across the red wall, where this election is going to be won or lost. I think what may be widely hailed across the red wall is the fact that the energy price cap that's due to go up from $2,500 to $3,000 a year for the average household is probably going to stay at $2,500. I think there'll be help for people on prepayment meters, the extra charges that they incur each year, about 45 or 50 quid a year. I think they'll be scrapped. I think for corporation tax, I've fought a long campaign, if you like, to keep it frozen at 19%. I think it may, in fact, go up to 25%. There'll be better allowances, particularly for bigger business, when they invest.
And can we just talk about that in a bit more detail? Because Tom was looking at this in terms of what was called the headline rate and the effective rate. And as you've sort of indicated, very different circumstances for the multinationals and white van man or the sole trader, whatever, still trying to make a fist of things and being clobbered with tax. Is there an indication on the Tory backbenchers that they're not being sensitive enough to the smaller businesses?
Absolutely. I've been talking about this literally for months. If you raise the rate of corporation tax by 6 percentage points from 19 to 25%, which is the current situation, is going to go up in April, that absolutely clobbers smaller businesses, and then you say, oh, but it's OK, we're giving more generous investment allowances. That helps big businesses because they've got a lot more cash to invest and they can then offset that investment 100% against their tax.
We've also looked at, things like the hospitality industry, pubs suffering, bars and the whole nighttime industry. Suggestions we may get a little bit more duty on a bottle of wine, 45 pence?
I think there will be more duty on drink. I think fuel duty on petrol and diesel will probably be frozen again. I think the anti-fuel duty lobby has fought a very canny campaign on that. And, of course, if you increase fuel duty, Mark, it goes straight into inflation. I also think that Jeremy Hunt will maintain the freezing of tax thresholds. That sounds complicated, but that just means that it's frozen at, say, £50,000 a year. So as wages go up over the years and the threshold's frozen until 2028, more and more people get caught by that. It's called fiscal drag. So it's like a stealth tax.
Exactly. So he's actually taking more tax, but it's not a tax.
So the headline rate stays where it is, but by freezing the thresholds, as if we're stupid and we don't notice, you take in a lot more tax.
Very quickly now, what's happening on the markets? Because we had this situation with this Silicon Valley bank in the States. They were in trouble. It appeared yesterday that the government here moved very quickly to sort things. Oh, I'm just being told we've just got an urgent question coming up in the House of Commons. We're just going to go across because it's on BBC Impartiality. Let's cross to the chamber now.
As a thriving cultural, creative and democratic engine for many years to come, the SCDO announced just this week it's giving an extra £20 million to support the BBC World Service over 2 years, building on the additional support we gave them in their Ukraine and Russia reporting operations. But the social compact that underpins the BBC's funding arrangement depends fundamentally on the broadcaster maintaining the trust and confidence of viewers. The BBC's currency in a world of misinformation and shout the loudest public discourse is truth, impartiality, accuracy and editorial integrity. It remains our priority as a government to work with regulator Ofcom to deliver an effective and proportionate framework that holds the BBC to account on its duties, including to impartiality. In May 2020, we launched the mid-term review, a key focus of which is impartiality, and we will assess Ofcom's regulation, ensuring that BBC meets the high standards that licence fee payers expect of it.
Acting Chair of the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee, Damien Green.
Madam Deputy Speaker, last weekend was embarrassingly terrible for the BBC. and anyone who cares about the future of the BBC will want this furore to die down and move on as fast as possible. Does my honourable friend agree that it's BBC management's responsibility to produce a set of clear and enforceable guidelines for the behaviour of presenters, whether freelance or staff? And does she also agree with me that in return, presenters whose reputations and bank balances are enhanced by regular appearances on popular BBC shows also owe a reciprocal responsibility to the BBC, which may include some self-restraint in what they say and do in public?
Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend for that important question, and I agree that anybody who cares about the BBC will want this furore to die down so that we can focus on how to make sure that it operates to the terms that create confidence in the public. He asked about the BBC guidelines, and I agree that these are fundamentally important to how the BBC organises its staffing. One of the key recommendations of the Sirota Review is that those guidelines to how its presenters operate are fundamental and should be applied no matter the seniority, profile or role of that employee. And this is something that must be revisited by the BBC as an organisation in light of this furor.
SNP spokesperson John Nicholson.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, on Saturday, BBC bosses said Gary Lineker would have to apologise before being allowed back on air. Yesterday, the BBC Director General apologised to Gary Lineker, who will now go back on air without compromising. What a mess. A humiliating retreat for BBC bosses. Now, normally the BBC chair would hit the airwaves to steady nerves, but of course the chair is Richard Sharp, the Tory donor who facilitated an £800,000 loan for the Prime Minister, who then appointed him BBC chair. Mr Sharp appears to be in hiding. Now, I know many on the benches opposite loathe the BBC and public service broadcasting. But would the Minister agree that her Conservative colleagues have overplayed their hand in trying to influence BBC decision-making? And would she agree, moreover, that we need a new system for plum public service appointments, with no more party donors, either Tory or Labour, appointed in the future?
Minister.
Well, I thank him for his question, but I want to make clear we have not, as ministers, sought to intervene or interfere in how this process has been handled by the BBC, and I will not be commenting on the Lineker case specifically, because I want to maintain that the independence of the BBC and the ability of the Director General to make decisions based on how he wishes to organise his institution. In relation to Mr Sharp, as I responded to the Honourable Lady, the BBC Charter is clear that it's the Director General, as Editor-in-Chief of the BBC, not the Chairman of the Board, who has final responsibility on issues such as the ones we've seen over the weekend.
Sir John Hayes.
Madam Speaker, mindful that the Minister doesn't want to comment on self-indulgent, out-of-touch, insensitive, avaricious, smug and arrogant.
So, urgent questions there in the Commons that we just brought you on the whole issue, of course, of BBC impartiality following that Gary Lineker case, and Lucy Fraser, the Culture Secretary, answering those questions. Damien Green calling it an embarrassingly terrible time. John Nicholson, the SNP, then, of course, talking about the whole issue of Richard Sharp as the Board of Governors Chairman, but Lucy Fraser indicating that the government, or at least ministers, were seeking not to intervene because of the independence of the BBC, but clearly still a political hot potato for the government. You're watching GB News Live. We'll have all of the latest for you coming up in a moment in the programme, but first, let's get an update on the rest of the headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thanks very much. It's 2 minutes past 2. Here are the headlines from the GB newsroom. A woman's been sentenced to 8.5 years in prison for perverting the course of justice after falsely accusing a number of men of rape. 22-year-old Eleanor Williams also made a Facebook post alleging she'd been a victim of an Asian grooming gang. Preston Crown Court heard how 3 men she falsely accused attempted to take their own lives. Her accusations led to protests in her hometown of Barrow-in-Furness, with some businesses forced to close. She'll serve half the sentence behind bars. Jordan Trengove, one of Eleanor's victims who was wrongly accused of rape, says he doesn't think the sentence is long enough.
I think she has any remorse. I looked back a few times while the judge was speaking and there was just no remorse shown, so, well, I've tried ending my life over it. I've had a bond with my son. I've not been able to leave the house. I've not been able to go to work, you know, so it's just, now I know she's locked away for a bit longer, it's just a bit of a relief, but I wish it was longer a sentence.
The Chancellor is looking at increasing the lifetime pension allowance in an attempt to reverse the trend of early retirements. It's understood Jeremy Hunt is considering allowing individuals to put more money into their pension pot before being taxed. The current lifetime allowance stands at just over £1 million, with savers incurring tax after the personal threshold has been exceeded. The measures are expected to be unveiled at tomorrow's budget as the Chancellor looks to increase Britain's workforce to help stimulate the economy. Downing Street has defended its new military deal with the United States and Australia after Beijing criticised the measures as fuelling a new arms race. The Prime Minister and US President discussed increased assertiveness from China with an agreed approach to engage and maintain talks with the country. Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden met in San Diego alongside the Australian Prime Minister to announce a new submarine programme between the three countries. Mr Sunak outlined security steps in the UK, with the leaders discussing the importance of working together for global stability. The President says he intends to visit Northern Ireland in April, whilst the Prime Minister has been invited to Washington in June. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat told GB News it requires a multi-agency government effort to tackle the threat from China.
The AUKUS element, the defence element that the Prime Minister was in San Diego signing, is only one aspect of it, and there's much more about this to come. So this is a whole-of-government approach. It involves education, it involves the police, it involves so many different aspects of our intelligence services that this is a huge, I'm afraid, challenge. It's true, because there are some areas where we've got to engage. We've got to engage with our eyes wide open, and this is something I've always said. We mustn't be naive. There were certainly some people who may have been in recent decades.
Job vacancies have fallen for the 8th month in a row as firms hold off from recruiting due to economic pressures. The Office for National Statistics has also found the rate of UK unemployment has remained unchanged at 3.7% in the 3 months to January. It said real pay continues to fall despite a drop in the inflation rate. Tens of thousands of appointments and operations are expected to be cancelled as strikes by junior doctors is underway for the second day. NHS leaders say the 72-hour action is putting emergency care under significant pressure also. The British Medical Association says junior doctors in England have suffered a 26% real terms cut to their pay. Last week, the Health Secretary invited the BMA to talks, but the union rejected the idea due to unacceptable preconditions imposed by the government. New figures show only a fraction of police officers facing complaints over their treatment of women were sacked. National Police Chiefs Council data shows of the 1,500 officers and staff who were accused of violence against women and girls, just 1% left the force. It also found more than 1,000 complaints were made against police conduct in a 6-month period. Complaints relate to various allegations against police in England and Wales between October 2021 and March 2022, those allegations including sexual harassment. Paedophile and former pop star Gary Glitter has been sent back to jail for breaking bail conditions less than 6 weeks after being released. The 78-year-old had been freed last month after being jailed in 2015 for sexually abusing 3 schoolgirls. He had served 8 years behind bars after serving half of his 16-year sentence. Sir Brian May has suggested he could go on tour again this year as he was awarded a knighthood by the King. The lead guitarist for the band Queen is known for some of the most iconic riffs in popular music, including the famous solo on Don't Stop Me Now. The musician's been awarded the honours at Buckingham Palace after being recognised for his services to music and charity. He called the occasion very special. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Let's just update you a bit of breaking news that we're getting from Cheltenham, of course, with the meeting underway there. This is being reported by the Sun newspaper. A bookmaker is suspending betting on Cheltenham after 36,000 punters backed an accumulator bet. 2,155 to 1 long shot. Paddy Power saying they probably have to pay an incredible £100 million if the bet comes in. They've just seen the bet slip coming in. It's Dysart Dynamo, Nassalam, Mary's Rock and Risk Bell all to win on this first day of the festival. Gamblers placing the money after it was tipped by an expert, Andy Robson, on Twitter. They've done their sums. Indicating the payoff might be rather high. So they've actually suspended that bet. That's just coming from Cheltenham, which is an interesting aside. We'll update you on that. But let's just talk now about the issue of submarines and the Chinese threat, because you remember yesterday the US, UK and Australia announcing a multi-billion-dollar deal to work together to supply Australia with nuclear-powered submarines, all this to counter the rise of China in the Indo-Pacific. Well, China hit back today by accusing the leaders on embarking on a path of error and danger in fueling an arms race, they said. Well, Rishi Sunak, Joe Biden and also the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, had announced those plans in an allied front at that meeting there in San Diego. A strong message to China. But, of course, all three countries will have to invest heavily, already concerns indeed over production capacity due to worker shortages and existing demand for the boats. Well, Britain's planning to increase the Barrow-in-Furness shipyard workforce from 10 to 17,000 to increase its capability. But we're told in the United States there's a waiting list for the current 17 boats on order. Well, joining us now, former NATO commander, Rear Admiral Chris Parry. Chris, thanks for your time once more. Clearly, it is a political message to the Chinese, but in terms of the subs themselves, I mean, one's assuming they're not going to be in service for quite a time yet.
Well, good afternoon, Mark. That's absolutely right. But I think what we can look forward to now is greater cooperation between the existing submarines of all three countries, the sharing of facilities, docking, maintenance and operational bases as well. And that'll increase the availability of the current submarine force as we bring together the technology, training and expertise for the development of these new hulls.
To talk about nuclear-powered submarines rather than nuclear-armed submarines. So what is the role going to be? I mean, we assume that the nuclear boats, the missile boats, are there for a deterrent. But are these just going to be on patrol or just sort of shadowing Chinese naval vessels?
Well, hunter-killer submarines like these are the capital ships of modern navies. If you go back to the Falklands War, the number one lesson in the Argentinian lessons learned document says British nuclear submarines posed a threat with which the Argentinian Navy couldn't cope. And that remains the case today. They're very silent, they're very fast, they operate in a stealth environment, and they carry a range of torpedoes, missiles for taking out other submarines, surface ships, and attacking land targets as well. So they're very powerful units. But on top of that, they're great listening and surveillance platforms as well. They can hear what's going on underwater, and they've got sensors that can link with other sensors, including those in space, that enable us to track what is going on. I think it's a bit rich of the...
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. I said, do you think that the first role has already been achieved in that we've got this reaction from China talking about a typical Cold War mentality, going further down a dangerous road, and the whole issue of the Cold War? It's certainly made them sit up and take notice.
Well, I think it's, I mean, it's rather like Mandy Rice Davis, isn't it? They would say that, wouldn't they? You're talking about a country that is massively expanding its armed forces. They've built more tonnage for their Navy in the last 3 years than we actually have in the Royal Navy. So if there is an arms race, the Chinese are well round the track, and we're trying to catch up at the moment to make sure they can't dominate our allies and oppress people in the Indo-Pacific.
And is there, in terms of the more sort of immediate threat, a question about Taiwan? Because one assumes that's going to be a question of air power rather than naval power, or am I sort of getting it the wrong way around there?
Mark, you know, as somebody who's been in this business for a long time, the Chinese don't have to attack Taiwan. All they have to do is blockade it by air and sea, and then challenge the rest of us to break the blockade. So they're not going to attack it anytime soon. But we'd be crazy to fight China in its backyard. And I don't think there's any amount of American firepower that can actually go into that theatre and prevent an invasion of Taiwan. What we have to be able to do is deter and resist coercion and make sure they don't even think it's worth trying it. And there's a range of things we can do. Tom Tugendhat just mentioned something that, you know, I've had in play for about 15 years, and that's bringing all the instruments of political power to bear, including economics, diplomacy, information. And frankly, if they did go up against Taiwan, we'd look to cripple China's international trade. And I think that would be the most effective way of saying to China, look, we'll tell you ahead of it now. If you try, this is what we're going to do. So go ahead if you want.
So going a bit further than just banning TikTok on that particular scale. But, Chris, thank you very much indeed for your time once more and bringing us your assessment. We'll just talk on that in more detail now and talk to Brent Sadler, Senior Fellow for Naval Warfare and Advanced Technology at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. The FT in London, Financial Times, did have a story, Brent, yesterday in terms of the boats already on the order sheet there in the United States, some 17 boats that haven't even been delivered yet. So how soon could these things be in service?
So so thanks again for having me on. So having been a submariner for a lot of years, I definitely appreciate the role that these boats can have in a conflict with China, and certainly would be a stealthy asset that could get inside their threat. But the 17 boats, 18 by some counts, those are submarines waiting for maintenance at other yards and our public shipyards. There's 4 of them in the United States. Of course, there is a long order as well that still has to get delivered, and there is a capacity issue of U.S. shipbuilding that's at question.
But what would they do? Because we used to sort of, well, Polaris first and then Trident, of course, in terms of the nuclear deterrent. They're a hidden threat under the oceans. Presumably this is going to be a different role in terms of the Indo-Pacific theatre.
Well, absolutely. So the submarine class that's being proposed that Australia will buy from the United States is a Virginia class. And we know that it's not going to be the version that has the hypersonic Virginia payload module associated with it. So that aside, the ship does have a very potent anti-ship, and it does still have a strike capability with Tomahawk cruise missiles that could be launched from vertical launch cells forward of the sail. So this is in addition to any potential payload modules.
Right.
So that's the class that's in question. Could be delivered as early as 2030, but those details were not discussed yesterday.
No, for obvious reasons. But, I mean, why wouldn't we actually equip them with hypersonic missiles, in that seems to be what both Russia and China is waving in our face all the time, you know, their advanced capability in these particular weapons?
Well, I think it's an open question. The Australians have said, gone on record saying that it's not a capability that they see as necessary in the early beginnings of their own nuclear submarine program. Maybe later, when they do the co-development with the UK on a follow-on AUKUS-class submarine, which was discussed yesterday by the Prime Ministers and the President. But for right now, having a nuclear submarine with the ability to stay at sea for many months, stealthily and up next to China, that's the priority for Australia. And it's certainly a capability that augments very nicely U.S. military capabilities in the Indo-Pacific.
OK. Brent, Senior Fellow Naval Warfare and a former submariner, of course, which is very important indeed in talking these matters. Thanks for joining us in Washington. Thanks for your time. Now, let's return to this extraordinary case at Preston Crown Court with a 22-year-old woman jailed for 8.5 years after falsely claiming to have been the victim of an Asian grooming gang. Well, Eleanor Williams of Barrow-in-Furness in Cumbria sentenced after making a series of false rape allegations. In her Facebook post in May 2020, she shared these pictures more than 100,000 times. describing being beaten, abused and trafficked by Asian men, pictures of her injuries, but the court then hearing that she'd caused this injury to herself by using a hammer. Well, joining us in the studio once more, Mark White, our Home and Security Editor. It's an extraordinary case, Mark, not just in terms of what she alleged to have happened, but what happened then to the three men in particular, all of them attempting to take their own lives as a circumstance of this.
Yeah, there were multiple people actually that she accused of rape and sexual assault, of trafficking her as well. But three in particular reacted so badly, understandably, to the allegations made against them that they tried to take their own lives. So as individuals, Mohammed Ramsan, a local businessman in Barrow and Furness itself, also Jordan Trengrove, a young man in that town, and Oliver Gardner, who had met her actually in Preston on a night out. Just a chance encounter. He was quite drunk on that evening.
Yeah.
They did go down a back alley for about 60 seconds for what he said was a very brief sexual encounter, which he claimed was consensual. She had claimed that she had been raped, that he had attempted to traffic her, that he was involved in illegal drugs with her as well. All of that disproved in court because they had the CCTV, which showed them engaging for about 60 seconds. And that was that. That was just one of the allegations that was disproved. Others around Mohammed Ramsan claiming that he had tried to traffic her to Pakistan at one point, that he'd taken her to Amsterdam, that he had sold her around people there, that he'd injected her with heroin and passed her around various people for money. All of that disproved again because he was actually in Barrow and Furness at the time that the allegations were made against him.
And this was a family man with a business, and as we heard outside the court, the impact of the allegations were just quite extraordinary.
Yes, I mean, he's still deeply traumatised by this. He tried to take his own life in front of his family. He was so troubled and still bears the scars to this day. Again, as I say, you know, with Jordan and with Oliver, they tried to take their own lives as well. Oliver still receiving psychiatric care for what he's gone through. And all of them say, you know, that regardless of whether they may have been cleared in a court of law, mud sticks.
Both using the same phrase.
And there will be some people that still believe this young woman, especially given the fact that she still claims many of the allegations that she made were true.
Yeah. Well, let's hear about the impact it had. Mohammed Ramsan speaking outside the court after the sentencing. This is what he had to say.
All I'll say is there's no winners here today. I feel no sense of triumph, only sadness. For the loss of the years, the impact on my family, here we are, and the true impact that this will have on true victims. That's the loss here of slavery and sexual abuse. As a father and an uncle to my amazing girls, this fills me with profound sadness. The word profound, that's profound sadness this is. Only the love and unwavering support from my family enabled me to endure this nightmare. They gave me the strength I needed.
Mohammed Ramsan speaking there with his wife and his two sons outside the court. 8.5 years, half of that will be served on licence, and the judge went through quite a complicated process explaining why he was limited in some degrees about what he could actually sentence her to. But he said no significant sign of remorse and, more pertinently, no explanation as to why she did this.
No, indeed, and there was psychiatric evidence that was given to court as well. The prosecution's a psychiatrist said that he could find no underlying psychiatric reason, that she was someone who was immature, that she had anger issues. But the psychiatrist for the defence, well, they pointed to delayed post-traumatic stress disorder.
But dismissed by the judge.
Well, yes, he sided with the prosecution psychiatrist on that. There was talk of some childhood trauma, but that was never gone into. It was never relied upon by the defence.
And you pointed out, there's this CCTV footage then. This was her buying the hammer, which she inflicted those injuries on herself, and therefore, obviously, the element of the calculation, and not a spur-of-the-moment thing.
No, absolutely.
Premeditation in legal terms.
Yes, indeed. And it wasn't just the fact that, she'd gone to the trouble of buying the likes of the hammer. In the premeditation, there was elaborate stories that was made up. She'd gone to the trouble of looking on the internet, picking up apparently random names to claim that these were individuals who were trafficked. When the police checked up with these people, they had no knowledge and were quite shocked when the police were trying to offer them help and support and to find out exactly how they had been trafficked. So a very elaborate story that she'd concocted. But of course, when that image, that very graphic image, was posted on Facebook, that provoked a very widespread backlash, with people from outside of Barrow and Furness heading to that town, protesting. There was a big spike in crimes in the area, 150 additional offences that the police would find normally over that period, and 83 of those they described as hate crimes. And we know that some of those individuals that had been accused have spoken themselves of how they were targeted, windows smashed at their house, damage to their cars, spray painting on their doors.
And even local journalists subject to credible threats, police under pressure because attempts to find their home addresses. The whole conspiracy theory that came up that this was being perhaps sort of sat on and the truth wasn't being told and so on.
Yeah, I mean, and it does highlight some real issues around whether or not those who are accused of serious crimes like sexual offences, rape and the like, should be given the same kind of anonymity as victims are afforded until they're convicted. It's probably unlikely. This has been reviewed at various points over the years. We are now at a process where the media are not allowed to start naming someone just at the moment of arrest. It's only from the point when they are charged that police will name someone. But as we know, you can be charged but then subsequently found not guilty, but your life can be irreparably changed.
The mud sticks, as they both said, Mark, thank you very much indeed for that. Coming up, we'll be reflecting once more on other crime issues, this time the 1,500 police officers and staff facing complaints about their treatment of women in a just 6-month period. And what happened to them, we'll be revealing that in a moment. Stay with us.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go. But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, let's update you on the latest figures that reveal that less than 1% of more than 1,500 police officers and staff who'd faced complaints about their treatment of women in the 6-month period were actually sacked. Well, the data has been published by the National Police Chiefs Council today. It shows that 653 conduct cases relating to violence against women and girls were brought against some 672 individuals by police forces in England and Wales between October 2021 and March 2022. Let's get reaction now with Patsy Stevenson joining us, a women's rights activist, joining us in the studio. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Clearly, we haven't got access to the details of all the particular cases, but the numbers are pretty sort of alarming, if we can use that phrase. The police themselves are saying, no, well, it could just relate to as simple a fact of someone complaining about the way handcuffs were put on an individual, for instance.
I mean, I would argue as well, these are the people that have come forward. So it could be that more of these cases exist, but we just don't know about them yet. I also want to point out, this is just through pressure of the public. These reports that come out about how many complaints have been done about surrounding violence against women and girls is just because of the public pressure and because of how little women trust the police at the moment.
Yeah, but obviously that's a positive, and we had the Met Police Commissioner saying, look, expect a lot of these cases coming to court now because people are starting to report these things and they're becoming more aware of them as well.
Yeah, but I mean, I think they've been aware a long time. I mean, David Carrick, for example, you can't tell me that no one knew about that. There were several complaints raised and nothing was done about it. So it's all well and good holding yourself accountable, but where was this years ago? Why is this just happening now? Because there's a lot of public pressure. They've realised that they've lost a lot of trust.
Yeah, and of course the Wayne Couzens is the other high-profile case as well. So the question is, therefore, about the disciplinary procedures within the police force when these come forward, because Peter Blexley, former police chief, came in and said, look, we have, body cameras nowadays that tell their own story. The picture tells the right story. And clearly those weren't available in years gone by. So is it likely that we're going to get a fairer assessment of what's happening as a result of that?
I mean, hopefully. We try to remain optimistic about these things, but I know that a lot of times, and this is very true, and a lot of people know about this, and a lot of people tell me about these stories, but when they're asked for that evidence, people do switch off the cameras, number one. Number two...
So they're physically able to do that?
They are able to do that, and a lot of times the video somehow gets lost or something is affected. So there are cases where that's happened, and that's where we've got a danger. So although, yeah, this is a great step, there's still a lot to be done and a lot that needs changing.
Yeah, there has been comment about the role of the Police Federation, the police union, in terms of defending its members, which obviously is their job to do, but the fact that they have so much power.
Yeah, I think the problem with policing at the moment is that a lot of the time, the police investigate the police. And that's where we've got a lot of these reports where we're saying, oh, OK, even the vigil...
Even if it's an outside force that comes in from elsewhere, for instance.
It's a lot of the time, they're not doing a proper investigation. A lot of organisations that I know are asking for independent investigations into what's going on. We've still got the Baroness Casey report to come out. There's a lot of things that...
Well, this is the other issue, that when these independent investigations and inquiries take place, it takes so much time for the process to be... So does it work to that degree?
It does, in a sense. I mean, it's good for accountability. It's good to show the scale...
Someone's watching.
Yeah, the scale of these things happening. And also consequences. There very much needs to be consequences for people who are misogynistic in the force, of course. Unfortunately, through the 2 years of activism that I've been doing, I haven't seen much change at all, and that's sad.
And in terms of consequences, that would be the aspect of perhaps disciplinary proceedings or losing your jobs, as well as then going the extra mile to court cases of alleged assault or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, if you go to court with an alleged assault, it's very rare that it'll even be convicted. Like, the conviction rate is very low for those anyway. policing system, even rarer because they are so close to the justice system. But then you've got things like, say, for example, Wayne Couzens. He was done for indecent exposure just before what he did to Sarah
And the judge
Everard.
indicating that perhaps if that had been reported earlier...
This is what I'm saying. So if there's consequences... And, I mean, it starts off with objectification, this misogyny that police are doing. If that is caught early and nipped in the bud, it shouldn't lead to abuse.
Last very quick thought, because we'll go to the news shortly. What about the danger of a witch hunt, if you like, that every sort of push and shove in terms of arrests is reported as violence against women?
Well, I think, you know, it depends. And I think if you've not done anything serious, you don't have anything to worry about. So,
OK.
Yeah.
Pamela, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And, of course, we'll see what the next set of figures tell us in terms of that story. Patsy Stevenson there, women's rights activist, reacting to those latest figures. Coming up, spring budget. Good, bad or indifferent? We'll be running our calculator over that. But first, let's get an update on the news headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you. It's 2:33. Here are the headlines. A woman's been sentenced to 8.5 years in prison for perverting the course of justice after falsely accusing a number of men of rape. 22-year-old Eleanor Williams also made a Facebook post alleging she'd been a victim of an Asian grooming gang. Preston Crown Court heard how 3 men she falsely accused attempted to take their own lives. Her accusations led to protests in her hometown of Barrow-in-Furness, with some businesses forced to close. She'll serve half of her sentence behind bars. The Chancellor is looking at increasing the lifetime pension allowance in an attempt to reverse the trend of early retirements. It's understood Jeremy Hunt is considering allowing individuals to put more money into their pension pot before being taxed. The current lifetime allowance stands at just over £1 million, with savers incurring tax after that personal pension pot threshold has been exceeded. The measures are expected to be unveiled at tomorrow's budget. Downing Street has defended its new military deal with the United States and Australia after Beijing criticised the measures as fuelling a new arms race. The Prime Minister and US President discussed increased assertiveness from China with an agreed approach to engage and maintain talks with the country. Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden met in San Diego alongside the Australian Prime Minister to announce a new submarine programme between the 3 countries. A number of dry cough medicines are being recalled from pharmacies over safety concerns. The Medicine and Healthcare Regulator has called for treatments containing the cough suppressant Volcodeine to be pulled from the shelves as a precaution. Health experts warn it could cause a severe allergic reaction in some people having general anaesthesia for surgery. Pharmacies have been told to stop supplying the products immediately. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So we're looking ahead, or not, to the spring budget tomorrow. The Chancellor set to put economic inactivity perhaps at the forefront of plans, trying to get people back to work or staying in work. Jeremy Hunt also expected to address changes to childcare benefit, alcohol fuel duty, energy bills, pensions, even the price of cigarettes. And if you're a smoker, you might want to consider putting down the fags. They could face the biggest ever price hike to date, we're being warned. Well, joining us now in the studio, business and economics editor Liam Halligan with On the Money. And we should reflect, of course, chancellors do have a bit of previous of, you know, warning us about, it's going to be really... And then, of course, they produce the rabbit out of that. Not as bad as we were thinking.
Expectations management, as they say. There may be a bit of expectations management on one of the flagship policies, which is raising corporation tax from 19 to 25%. The Treasury is absolutely determined, on and off the record, no, it's going up to 25%. So if it goes up by less... even though this would be the first rise in corporation tax in over 50 years, if it goes up by less, or if there are some nice investment allowances alongside, then that will be seen as a good thing. I think it's going to be a very kind of wide-ranging budget. As you say, the usual stuff on booze and fags, as we say. I think fuel duty on petrol will be frozen. I think there will be a bit more help with childcare, state subsidised childcare, and I think there'll be a rise in the lifetime pensions allowance, something that will only really affect, you know, the top sort of 3 or 4 most wealthy
but quite
families.
Specific maybe about keeping NHS consultants in work.
Maybe.
It's obviously, but just looking at the bigger picture, I mean, we've talked in the past couple of weeks about the so-called headroom, i.e. a bit of extra money available to give them a bit of flexibility, but also the concern of the IMF and the Bank of England about the growth going ahead. How do you get the economy moving? So this is the sort of trick he's got to try and pull off.
Well, this word you use, headroom, that's because the government is going to borrow less than people thought. It's borrowing less than people thought, than the Office of Budget Responsibility thought, the official watchdog, because it's spending less on energy subsidies, because wholesale energy prices have come down quite a lot. It's spending less on debt interest because it's borrowing less than we thought, because growth has been stronger. Everyone said we're going to go into recession. Some of us didn't. It seems that we've dodged recession, at least for now. So maybe the government's got a bit more money to play with. But Jeremy Hunt is going to look at his own backbenchers who want tax cuts, who want money being invested for growth. And he's going to say, I'm not going to do this. And the reason I'm not doing this is because when we took risks last time, that Kwarteng Trust budget and the markets went haywire, he's going to point to the financial markets yesterday and today. There's lots of turmoil out there. It's not hitting the headlines, but it's definitely happening. Particularly in the States, you've got money now going from smaller banks like Silicon Valley Bank, the one that went bust, to the bigger banks. There's no systemic danger at the moment, but there's lots of turmoil and turbulence underneath the radar on financial markets.
And just to explain to people, a lot of suggestion in the States may be that banks hadn't assessed the impact that higher interest rates would have on bonds and so on, and where that's affecting their holdings. The Chancellor not directly responsible for that. That's the Bank of England governor. However, as you say, they'll want maybe to try and keep things calm. Don't frighten the horses, which is what happened last time.
I think the Chancellor, he'll be hoping, obviously, that there's no additional turmoil on in terms of the banking sector. Certainly the Treasury of the Bank of England moved fast. But I don't think it's cynical. I just think it's realistic to assess that the Chancellor will be able to point to this turmoil and say, this is why you need a Chancellor who's a grown-up and a safe pair of hands.
Jeremy from accounts, as he keeps
Other people would say, no, this is a time to take some risks. We've got to get ourselves out of a hole. We need to be conviction politicians. We've got to be like Nigel Lawson in the 1980s and slash the top rate of tax, slash corporation tax in order to get the economy moving post-lockdown and given the impact of this war in Ukraine.
Yeah, and his position became unassailable, as we remember. Look what happened to him. However, that was another aspect, but we're on air at 11 o'clock tomorrow, of course, with our special budget programme. Join us for that, and we'll go through all the figures as they come up. Thousands of junior doctors on the picket line again today, day 2 of their stoppage over pay. Health leaders warning hospitals of cancelled operations. The NHS under high pressure, they say. Well, the British Medical Association, the BMA, saying junior doctors' pay falling in real terms by 26% over the past 15 years, and reversing that would now require a 35.3% pay rise. Let's get more from Eastbourne District General Hospital with our South East of England reporter Ray Addison, who's been speaking, of course, to junior doctors there on that picket line. Ray, do they think this is a realistic assessment of getting that sort of rise, or are they just pushing for what the best cases they can get?
Mark, I think they're pushing for the best case that they can get. I think, as we've seen with all of these negotiations that have been taking place with the nurses and other organisations, there is obviously a compromise to be made, but they're asking for 35.3%, as you said, because they feel like their wages have been falling in real terms over the last 15 years. Junior doctors here at Eastbourne General have been telling me that when they start their profession, they begin with a career, with a debt rather, of around £80,000 to £100,000, and studies suggest that can add up to more like £250,000 by the time they've actually managed to pay it all off. And of course that has a huge impact on their lives, their ability to start a family, to get a mortgage, and all those other things that we have to do. And of course the starting salary is £14. That's less than a Pret barista, and yet they can be responsible for hundreds of patients on a shift. However, the Department of Health and Social Care says the comparison between themselves and baristas is misleading, because it doesn't take into account pay progression, which is available to junior doctors. Of course, those starting salaries can quickly rise. Now, the picket behind me was pretty busy today. Earlier on, I was down at Royal Sussex Hospital in Brighton. That had a lot more doctors outside. Here was about 20. They've gone now. They will be back tomorrow morning. But I asked them why they're so committed to this strike.
We don't want to be out here at all, but the real terms pay cut of the 25% over the year sort of led us with no real choice than to come out here. It feels like there's nothing left for us to do when we've got our colleagues that are undervalued, underappreciated, having put all the effort in to get to the point where we are.
From a personal standpoint, I know that half of my year group at least have gone to Australia or New Zealand because it's just a more attractive place to work. It's just better hours, better pay, and obviously more sunshine. So I'm just, a bit disillusioned at the moment. And I'm one of the only people I know that's continued to go into training, and this is obviously what we need to support the NHS in the future.
I'm striking today because ever since I was little I wanted to work for the NHS, and I think we're facing a real crisis at the moment throughout the entire nation. I think with regards to the junior doctor pay, we're facing 26% pay cut in real terms, and I don't think we're worth a quarter less than what we were 8 years ago.
The British Medical Association says 40% of their junior doctors plan to leave the NHS as soon as they're able to get another job. Doctors here telling me that they're constantly being approached by other medical organisations, countries like New Zealand, for example, which is a rather attractive offer. They're demanding a 35% pay rise, taking the lowest paid junior doctors to £19 an hour.
Ray, thanks very much for updating us to the picture there on the south coast at Eastbourne. Of course, looks after a lot of elderly patients in terms of their care. Let's get the views now. Michael Day, comment writer at iNews, former health correspondent indeed at the Sunday Telegraph. Michael, where are we, do we think, on the situation with the government? I think Steve Barclay had invited the BMA to talks on Friday, but the union's saying unacceptable because I think the pay on offer was like a lump sum for this past year, not consolidated, in other words.
I think with the key figure is the 35% figure, which clearly they're not going to pay. There's not a magic money tree, unfortunately. I don't think that's going to happen. And the government will come back in some way. I mean, one thing that's not been discussed much is the actual 35% figure. They're basing it, BMA, on the RPI index, which I think even the Nuffield Health Trust has said it should be the CPIH figure, which would then cut that supposed 26% drop to a 14% drop. So there are real things to be discussed, I think.
But clearly their point being that their pay has been falling behind for the past 10 years, and it's a similar situation, of course, with the nurses. But the stories we've heard as well is the conditions they're working under, and the fact that, you know, their assertion that baristas in Pret earn more than the doctors starting out on their careers.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone's doubting that junior doctors are badly paid. I mean, I checked this morning, I think, and the term junior doctor itself is a bit misleading. You can have supposedly junior doctors who may have had 5 or 6 years clinical experience on 50,000, which, given the depth and amount of their skill responsibility, isn't very much. I think the government would say, though, that in the long term, as consultants doing private work, they actually stand to make a lot more money. And I just wonder, if you look in historical terms, I think perhaps, I mean, the government definitely is culpable. It's been in for power 12 years now. It's totally failed to plan for staff, the amount of staff we need in the NHS, not just doctors, but nurses too. However, historically, we have a problem in this country. We don't have enough doctors, and you could argue that the doctors, their union, the BMA, and it is a union, has kept doctor numbers quite low, which obviously means they get paid more, perhaps in some other countries, and we're paying that price now, I think. I think the whole structure where you have supposedly junior doctors not getting paid that much, consultants then able to earn a lot, perhaps working privately, this hierarchical structure, like we suffered, so you have to suffer, it perhaps needs reviewing. That's a long-term thing, but certainly we need more doctors. I mean, their conditions are not good. The junior doctors are paid badly. There's no doubt about that. They have a lot of responsibility. We need to take a long-term look at staff planning, though.
OK, so no quick fix, but perhaps a reassessment of all staffing across the NHS. But another day of action to come, of course. Michael, we'll leave it there. A bit of interference on our sound signal, unfortunately. Apologies for that, but thanks very much indeed for joining us here on GB News. Now, let's go racing. Cheltenham Festival under starters' orders today, a mix of anticipation, uncertainty, and, well, maybe an accumulator bet as well. We'll talk about that in a moment. More than 250,000 spectators expected to attend the 4-day meeting. The unbeaten Constitution Hill topping the opening day bill in the Champions Hurdle. Runners facing disqualification, of course, if the jockeys also breach new rules, the use of the whip, and much talk too about how much riders will adapt to those changed regulations. Uncertainty too around the weather, because we've got these mixed forecasts with, well, a soft going, throwing the form book into doubt. To wrap it all up, Derek Thompson joining us, racing presenter and commentator. Great to speak to you, Derek. First of all, let me just, I don't know if you've seen this accumulator bet that the papers have got very excited about. Daily Mail talking about a 2,155 to 1 accumulator that Paddy Power have spotted, that some 32,000 punters have climbed on board. Paddy Power could be facing £1 million payout, so they've actually suspended betting on that.
Well, that's what the Cheltenham Festival is all about. And, you know, if you can get something good. But we've had 2-0 to Ireland. We've had 2 races so far. They've both gone to Ireland. We've got this Marine National Anthem winning the first, El Fabiola winning the second. So it's 2-0 to Ireland at the moment. And you can probably hear in the background, we've just got another race off the 250. This is the Ultima Handicap. And then, of course, we've got the Champion Hurdle, the first big race on the opening day. The sun is shining. The weather's quite good. It's dry at the moment. The going's on the soft side, and we've got about 70,000 people here. It's absolutely fantastic.
Great. And just to explain to those people that have never been, of course, we're talking about the Irish horses, a great Irish contingent enjoying the occasion. They're getting together, and a few pints of the black stuff being downed as well.
Yeah, and if you can afford a pint of Guinness, Matt, I know you can, £7.50 a pint.
Wow. Wow. So you need that accumulator bet to come in just to have a drink.
Exactly, you do. But there's something about this place. It is incredible. It is the Irish invasion. Last year they had so many winners. They beat us out of sight. And they're 2-0 up in the place to go. 26 races to go, of course, you know, over the next 3 days. But if the weather stays like this, it's going to be ideal. I watched the last race at the last fence with the former champion jockey, Harry Skelton. He didn't have a ride in it. I said, what's the ground like? He said, it's a bit sticky. So although it's soft, the horses are really having to try and work hard. So it's going to be good. Constitution Hill's going to be long odds on, and I wonder, will the horse be the new champion hurdler?
Right, well, we'll wait and see for the big one. But just to sort of also look back and turn the clock back, of course, they were really stung by the accusation about this being that super spreader event, of course, at the beginning of COVID. So I guess now people are really determined to actually still enjoy it and celebrate this racing occasion as well now.
I didn't quite pick that up, what you were saying. You were cracking up a little bit, Matt. Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry, I didn't quite get it because we got a commentary going on here in the background. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess that tannoy system is probably better than my microphone. But I was just saying, we turn the clock back and remember that Cheltenham was blamed as being this super spreader event, which stung quite a lot of people. So therefore, I guess people are now really even more determined to enjoy the occasion.
It's a very good call, and I remember it well 2 years ago, and I think most of us have had COVID since then. After the meeting last year, I was, in bed for a couple of days as well, and it really is something. I mean, there's 60, 70,000 people here, jam-packed. We'd like to say we're going to stick in the fresh air, which we can today, but say if it starts pouring down and it gets cold, and then we've got to go inside the marquees, inside the boxes, things like that, then obviously there is a potential. But let's hope it doesn't come back, it doesn't reach that stage, because it is great. We're here at the home of National Hunt Racing. It's a great atmosphere. It really is very, very special.
Derek, thank you for joining us on GB News. We'll let you get back to your half of Guinness. Thanks very much indeed.
Well done, Matt. See you soon.
Bye. And good luck if you've got that. Well, you won't have the accumulator bet because they stopped taking the money on it, but don't bet too much, of course. Be careful. Now, a public swimming pool in Devon using washing machine-sized computers to heat their pool. The computer's surrounded by mineral oil, which captures the heat and then produces enough of that heat to keep the pool at around, 30 degrees Celsius, 60% of the time. That's pretty warm. It means that Exmouth Leisure Centre saving thousands of pounds on electricity. Let's get more with our South West reporter, Jeff Moody, who's there. And I'm very disappointed not to see you in your Speedos, Jeff.
Yeah, well, it's hot. I'll tell you, I'm sweating. This is obviously, it's working too well, this system. There are two facts that are at play here. First of all, it's extremely expensive to cool down a data centre. You know, these big computers that store all of our things that are on the cloud, like our images, our photos, all of our technical data. And it's also extremely expensive, particularly now, to heat a swimming pool. So if you could combine the two and heat a swimming pool whilst cooling down a data centre at the same time, you're onto a winner. And that's what they are here. Mark, this was your idea. Deep Green, your company, came up with this idea. What gave you the idea of using a cooling data centre in order to heat a swimming pool?
Well, it wasn't actually our idea. It was a white paper written in 2011 by Microsoft, actually. So the principle of computers generating a lot of heat and needing to capture it some way has actually been established for 10 years. But we've been working for 5 years in a kind of an R&D phase, figuring out how to deploy it into pools safely and at scale. And now we've done that. We're moving into a kind of a launch phase, and that's what we really want. We want businesses around the country who, might have a carbon targets or might have their own sort of road to net zero. We want them to come and use this kit, migrate, come out of data centres, and start to use our kit.
I mean, it is the size of a washing machine, isn't it? It's a tiny little box with some computers in it, floating in oil.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, they're modular, so if we need more heat at any one place, you can stack them and put more there. But yeah, they are relatively small, and a conventional data center works by blowing cold air over the machines, so you have to have quite a lot of kit. Ours are immersed in oil, and the oil heats up when our computers heat up, and that's the oil that we flow through a heat exchanger, which gets it into the pool. So we're actually much more efficient than a conventional data center. I mean, the data center industry is already 3% of global carbon emissions, and projected to grow 10 times that amount. So what we understand is the data center industry really needs to migrate into this more decentralized model where we can recapture the heat. In a climate crisis, it makes no sense, right?
So in terms of the swimming pool here, you're offering energy for free to this pool. Yeah. How much is it saving them per year, do you think?
So we're doing the current installation doing about 60% of the load of the pool. As we optimize, we'll do a little bit more, probably 70, 80%. And that equates to about £20,000 a year saving for the pool now. But of course, Exmouth is just one of 1,500 pools around the country, and they can all benefit from this technology. So if we took just 1% of a data centre's capacity that we've got in the UK, converted it into deep green kit, we could heat all the pools in the country for free.
Mark, that's absolutely fantastic. What a great invention. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, yes, Mark, I'll go and get into my Speedos, but I'm certainly not filming it for you, I promise.
No, I was going to say, switch the camera off before you change into your cosy and you know, family viewing and all that. But great idea, because, of course, many pools across the country saying they can't afford to stay open or at least keep the temperatures up. But thanks for updating us there in Exmouth, and we'll see if that's going to be adopted elsewhere. Well, thanks for being with us on GB News Live today. Just to remind you, back at the slightly early time, 11 o'clock tomorrow, of course, a spring budget special with all the facts and figures for you, and Prime Minister's questions as well, so you won't want to miss it. But for now, Patrick with you until 6 this afternoon. Stay with us.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Patrick Christie's here with you on GB News 3 until 6. Here's what I've got coming up this hour. Pedo pop star Gary Glitter has been recalled to prison after breaching his licence conditions. We were ahead of that story yesterday. I'm asking whether or not paedophiles can ever be rehabilitated. In other news, we're covering this story as well, which is a girl has been sentenced to prison, a woman has been sentenced to time in jail over fake rape claims involving a non-existent Asian groom.